Township of Howell Zoning Board of Adjustment, Monday, May 23rd, 2022. I hereby declare this meeting of the Howell Township Zoning Board to be open. Adequate notice having been given pursuant to New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act in the following manner. First, on December 14th, 2021, a copy of said notice was mailed to the Asbury Park Press and the Tri-Town News. Second, on December 14th, 2021, a copy of said notice was hand-delivered to the clerk of the Township of Howell. Third, on December 14th, 2021, said notice was posted in the office of the zoning board and on the bulletin board in the Howell Township Municipal Building, 4567 Route 9 North, Howell Township, New Jersey. Please take note that this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcasts on Howell Township TV 77. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues of what the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and a decorum appropriate to additional hearing must be maintained at all times. For any members of the public wishing to ask questions or comment on an application, you will need to use the raise your hand feature when the chairman opens the hearing up for the members of the public. Once you are brought into the meeting, you will need to have audio and video, and you will be sworn in and required to give your name and address. If you are calling in, you can press *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Eileen. May we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Mr. Cantor.
Here.
Mr. Hughes.
Here.
Mr. Mertens.
Here.
Mr. Moretti. Absent. Mr. Orozco.
Here.
Mr. Saya.
Here.
Mr. Stanton.
Here.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Here.
And Chairman Nansen is excused. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Would everyone join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, Mr. Bear, can we have a swearing in of the zoning board professionals?
Yes, can the professionals please raise their hand? Do you swear the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
The professionals are sworn in.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
You're welcome.
Eileen, do we have any minutes?
No minutes tonight.
Eileen, do we have any vouchers?
No vouchers.
Eileen, do we have any correspondence?
No correspondence.
Okay, then number 8 on the agenda, resolutions. I believe we have 3 of them, correct? Okay,
Yes.
Starting up with the first one. Case number BA 21-26, Matthew Lynn. Resolution granting bulk variances. Eligible voters: Hughes, Mertens, Moretti, Stanton, Gonzalez, and Saya. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hughes.
Oh, we gotta make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve.
Oh, go ahead, Matt. I'll second.
Mr. Hughes.
Yes.
Mr. Mertens.
Yes.
Mr. Moretti.
Absent.
Mr. Stanton.
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Matt?
Matt?
Audio,
Yes,
Matt.
I think Matt might be having some connectivity issues. It looks like he's frozen.
Thumbs up is a yes.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My internet is going on and off, so just bear with me, please.
They were updating it all over town.
And
Eileen?
Chairman Saya.
Yes.
Resolution memorialized.
Okay, next one up on the agenda, case number BA 21-23, the Patterson Family Farm LLC. Resolution granting use variance and preliminary and final major site plan with ancillary variance relief. Eligible voters, Hughes, Mertens, Moretti, Stanton, Gonzalez, and Saya. Do we have a motion, please?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
yes,
Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes,
Resolution memorialized.
thank you. Case number BA. I don't know if that's an A, but 22-03. Hutton Street 17 LLC. Resolution granting conditional use variance and preliminary and final major site plan with ancillary bulk variance and design waiver relief. Eligible voters, Hughes, Mertens, Moretti, Gonzalez, and Saya. Do we have a motion, please?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Second,
I'll second.
Mertens. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez, Mr. Gonzalez, you're muted.
I think he's frozen again.
Oh, his head's moving.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Yes.
And Chairman Saya.
Yes,
Resolution memorialized.
thank you. Okay, on to item 9, applications before the board. Case number BA 22-07, Keystone Novelties Distributors LLC. Temporary use permit. Application of Keystone Novelties Distributors LLC as applicant and 1175 Route 33, Felix Borlowski, Route 70 properties as owner seeking a temporary use permit to allow a tent on the property to sell New Jersey sparkling devices from 6/22/22 to July 5th, 22, and from June 21st, 23 to July 5th, 2023, on premises known as Block 135, Lot 15.01, 2400 US Highway South. Okay, Mr. Bear, I take it we have the applicants, and do we have everyone brought in?
You're ready to proceed once you have the participants.
Can you hear me?
There's Mr. Middleton, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. And I believe Jack May is here. Who's the applicant? Jack, can you put your video on?
there we go.
There we go.
Okay. Just for the record, Timothy B. Middleton on behalf of the applicant. We're here this evening, as the chairman indicated, to request a temporary use permit to construct a tent to sell legal sparklers and novelty sales. The property in question is 2400 US Highway 9 South. I'd like to have Mr. May sworn in. I can deduce testimony from him.
Mr. May, can you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do.
And please state your name for the record. State your first, spell your last.
John May, M-A-Y.
The witness is sworn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
May I proceed?
Mr. Middleton,
Yes.
please do.
Mr. May, you're associated with the applicant, correct?
Correct.
And just briefly explain what your association is.
I am managing director. Essentially, I run the business.
Okay, and you're here tonight for a temporary use permit, correct?
That's right. We're here to apply for a temporary use permit, similar to the temporary use permit that we received 4 years ago at for a similar operation at Howell Lanes. We have operated there for the last 4 years in a compliant fashion with no incidents. The nature of the code allows for 2 consecutive years of 2 years with 1 renewal for a temporary permit, and that expired at Howell Lanes. So this is an alternative to the expiration of that original location that we ran for the last 4 years.
And that sort of answers the question that was raised, I believe, by the engineer. You're not requesting the temporary use permit for here and for the bowling alley property, correct?
No, unless the code changes, we're just applying for this location.
And I believe there was another location on 33 in Cold Snack Road, and you're not going to use that location this year, correct?
No, we received the permission from the landlord, but there's a lot of construction going on there. We thought that it was best for all parties that we just kind of take a pass on that this year. We'll have a better sense of tent placement and operating logistics once the construction is finished at that location. So we're likely to apply for a temporary use permit at that location next year.
Could you briefly describe the use here, hours of operation, employees, what exactly you're selling, et cetera?
Sure. So we operate about 40 of these types of sales throughout the state of New Jersey. Broader than that, we operate in about 10 states from the Canadian border down to North Carolina. We operate about 450 of these types of sales. We've been in business for 20 years. Essentially, we're a short-term temporary structure sale of state-approved fireworks. As you can imagine, in each state, the fireworks legislation is a little bit different, although generally speaking, very similar. Our obligation in most of the states, including New Jersey, is to operate in a compliant fashion with a regulation called NFPA, National Fire Protection Association 1124, which prescribes aisle width. It subscribes or prescribes the signage inside and outside the tent, placement of fire extinguishers, and the like. And we're very familiar with what is required of us to operate compliant with 1124, and that would be the nature of the operation that we're applying for. The sale is, as pointed out in the application before the board, it's roughly 2 weeks. Our hours are roughly 9 to 9. As we get closer to July 4th, the hours are extended for an hour or two. We use a generator to power lights for a very short period of time. Our intention is to have a porta potty on site for just the use of the tent operators. They are technically contractors. There'll be 1 or 2 on site at all times, providing 24-hour security over the product and the operation. In addition, we have what we refer to as a route manager. The route manager is responsible for overseeing roughly 8 to 9 locations in a geographic concentrated area. So we have a supervisor visiting each of our sales locations at least once, if not twice a day, throughout the sale, and just making sure that the operator is doing the things that they should be doing and not doing the things that they shouldn't be doing. So that's the nature of our operation.
Do you have an agreement with the owner of the property to do what you're doing or propose to do?
We do. There is an exhibit that was part of the the application. It is an agreement from the owner to operate the sale this year and next year, consistent with the term of the temporary use permit that we are applying for.
Okay. One of the questions raised by the engineer is the location of the generator. Is it going to be located in the right of way?
I frankly am not, it will not be in the roadway. It will be positioned in the grass. According to NFPA 1124, it needs to be at least 10 feet from the tent. And it'll be placed in a grassy area, at least 10 feet from the tent, and it won't be placed in the roadway.
So the roadway and the right of way are two different things. So there's grassy area that's technically in the DOT right of way. So I think, I don't mean to speak for you, Charlie, but like, we're not looking for a generator to be in the DOT right of way. So just because it's not cart way doesn't mean it's not, Tim, respectfully, just because it's not in the right of way doesn't mean it's not if it's not in the roadway, doesn't mean it's not in the right of way.
I know that. Jen, I just said we'll stipulate it won't be in the right of way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Can you describe, if you could, the security you're proposing at the site?
There will be physical presence 24 hours. We some of our locations we will lock the product away at night as an alternative to 24-hour security, and we have found that on-site presence is just a little bit more effective, and the operator is obligated to have either themselves or an assistant on site at all times, and our manager is there to ensure that 24-hour presence is adhered to.
Are you proposing any freestanding signs at the site?
We are. I submitted earlier today a picture, an illustration of the signs that are on the tent. So freestanding in the sense of not being placed on the tent, no. The signs that we will be using will only be placed on the tent.
And can you give us some idea of what they'll be?
There's roughly 4 signs, and they're 2 feet by 6 feet. In one case, 3 feet by 3 feet, and in another case, if Eileen is able to show exhibits, there are some pictures that I submitted earlier today that might be useful for the board in looking at what the tent looks like and the signage.
Middleton,
Yes,
you have more questions?
I have 1 or 2 more, yes.
After your questions, we'll turn it over to Charlie, and Charlie will put some stuff on the screen for us, okay?
Okay, I'll ask 1 more question and we can get it to Charlie quicker. Mr. May, one of the issues raised in the engineering letter was, will there be any signage indicating do not use within 300 feet?
Yes, that is an obligation of our operation under NFPA 1124, and there'll be 4 signs. They'll be placed on the outside, so they'll be visible to folks entering and exiting the tent. The size is 20 inches by 26 inches with 4.5-inch lettering. Again, compliant with 1124 and signs that we use throughout the 430 locations that we operate.
Okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton.
Thank you.
Hey, Charlie?
Yes,
Good-
Mr. Chair.
Good evening. This is an application that, we've seen before, but at the bowling alley. So now it looks like it's taking a new location in its request. So is there a way you can put that up there and show us what we're talking about?
Yeah, let me just try to share my screen real quick. Can you see this?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is just current 2021 Google Earth aerial imagery. So I've just traced the boundary of what the applicant, they provided a schematic plan showing where they're blocking out for their tent and then 2 additional parking spaces. This layout, I look back at the prior applications received for the bowling lanes and also at the Petroleum, 19 Petroleum up on 33 and Colesneck Road. It's very similar layout, same footprint, almost virtually the same footprint that we saw at Howell bowling lanes. Similar to Howell bowling lanes, they blocked out a number of parking spaces. Looking back at aerial imagery from Google Earth in the last 10 years, I couldn't find maybe one instance where there was more than 1 car parked in this eastern parking bay. So I think this is an appropriate location. If it was internal to the site, it'd be a little bit more questionable. I would just ask that the final location, it's hard to tell here, but I believe there is an ADA parking space that the applicant just confirmed that the location of the tent and any blocking doesn't prohibit the ADA access. Can you agree to that as a condition, Mr. Middleton?
Yes, absolutely.
And then I just want to clarify, I think there was testimony regarding 24-hour security. So 24-hour security is being provided. There's no separate storage container in one of these parking stalls that's going to be utilized at the site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then just to clarify for the board, I think Route 9 has a 100-foot right of way. So, 50 foot from, the center of the median, I think takes us, right around where this yellow line, this is GIS parcels, the applicant's location of the generator is somewhere around here. So I just wanted they agreed to the condition. It looks like they have ample room, but I think that just satisfies it and covers it from the board's perspective regarding any recommendation just from traffic safety. I will note that the fire official did issue a letter. Standard comments he's had on the last couple submissions, compliance with the state and federal fire code, fire extinguishers being required inside the tent. The one comment he did is just reviewing this as part of his due diligence, just to make sure that there's no access issues as far as fire for trucks and deliveries, because I think the circulation here is the main circulation through the back of the building for deliveries. So, the fire official might ask for a concrete, block that you've seen on temporary seating outside of restaurants on something like that, just for traffic safety perspectives. You don't want a truck driving into your tent with all your fireworks inventory. So I just asked that be made a condition of any recommendation. And then the last thing, it's sparklers, correct? There's no projectiles that are being sold from the site?
That's correct. Using the language of New Jersey law, it's sparkling devices and novelties.
Okay. And then just the last point of clarification for the board. So under 188-165, the board is we're not granting an approval, we're making a recommendation to the governing body. The governing body would then consider the granting of the temporary use permit for a period of 2 years. At the end of that 2 years, the applicant's entitled to come back to the board. We review it again and could make a recommendation for a subsequent 2-year extension to that permit. So what we're considering tonight is just a recommendation to the governing body for a 2-year permit, and the governing body would be the one that issues the permit based off of our recommendation. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Charlie. Fellow board members, does any of the board members have any questions at this time?
Just one, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
24-hour security, where does that person stay when the place is not open for the public?
Inside the tent.
Is the person armed or unarmed?
We
Firearms.
don't have a policy. Generally speaking, they're unarmed.
I'd be concerned that there'd be somebody armed on the site. Is that inappropriate, Mr. Chairman?
Well, there is, if a permit is issued, law enforcement is well aware of it, and they know when the site is in operation. And so I believe a 911 call would suffice should something like that come across.
Okay. Thank you. That satisfies my concern.
Okay, any other board members?
Yeah, Mr. May, how was it handled before? Because I didn't remember it being 24/7 security. Is that the way it's always been?
Yes, the
Okay,
last 4 years of operation. And generally, of the 40 tents that we operate in New Jersey, probably 38 of them are 24-hour security.
and I guess that's to alleviate the idea of having to unload everything into a storage thing for the night and then have to unload it again every day. Is that?
Yeah, and a unsupervised storage container is not as secure as a 24-hour security.
I concur. Thank you.
Okay, no other board members have any other questions? Why don't we turn it over to Ms. Beam and see what she has to say?
I have nothing, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Mr. Bear, you know, being that this is a permit and a recommendation to the governing body, do we have to open it up to public?
I would, just to be safe.
Okay, board members,
I'll make a motion to open the public, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hughes,
I'll second.
Mr. Stanton. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. Eileen?
The meeting will now be open to the public. If you are calling in, you could press *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Is there anybody? Nothing from the public as yet.
All right, we'll give it a little time. Okay, no one's raising their hand.
No.
All right, let's have a motion to close it to public, please.
I move that we close to the public.
Cantor,
Second.
second Hughes, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye, okay, ayes got it. Eileen, we're closed to public.
The meeting will now close to the public.
Okay, before we proceed, Mr. Aguirre,
Yes, sir.
you're familiar with this application?
I am.
And you'll be able to advise the governing body?
If so be so.
Do you have any concerns?
Just curious with product delivery, how is that being handled?
We have a third-party freight company, ABF Freight. They're national in scope with hazmat certification, delivering the product on the opening day of sale. Typically, our process is to get everything lined up and then call the fire marshal and have him come out and do an inspection on the opening day.
And throughout the event, are there going to be any deliveries as product weans down, or is there a set limit of product and as it sells out, it sells out?
There will be additional, well, hopefully, there will be additional product delivered as it sells down. This year, July 4th falls on a Monday. So we have 2 weekends. After the first weekend, if the sales are strong, we'll have an additional delivery, and that will typically be also from ABF Freight.
You're good, Mr. Aguirre?
Yes, sir, Mr. Saya.
Thank you. Fellow board members, do you have any other questions?
No, sir.
Okay, Mr. Middleton?
I have nothing to add, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Charlie, Jen?
Oh, Mr. Chair.
No, Mr.
Sherry?
Chair.
Okay, Mr. Bear, do you have anything?
The only thing, so Mr. Chairman, if the resolution would be making a recommendation to the governing body for a 2-year permit for these operations. That would be the resolution.
Very good. So then I would ask, what is the pleasure of the board? As you just heard what Mr. Bear is. stated it is. A recommendation to the governing body.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to make the recommendation to the governing body for the 2-year permit for this application.
Mr. Hughes, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Stanton? Roll call, please.
Mr. Cantor,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
Mr. Mertens,
Yes.
Mr. Roscoe,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
Yes.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Yes.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes, good luck.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Mr. Middleton, do you need before you go, do you need a resolution? Is this typically, was these in the past, have they been memorialized? If I assume so, but I just want to make sure.
I believe we should have one. Yes.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Okay, so then that close out this application for the zoning board at this time. That's BA 22-07. Coming up before us is application number BA 22-02, K-Land Corporation. Description: application of K-Land Corporation as applicant and Advantage Properties LLC as owners seeking the variance approval to construct a 3-story, 78,016 square feet self-storage building with 1,000 square feet of associated first floor office space, a 25-foot wide 2-way site driveway, 20 90-degree parking stalls, 2 above-ground infiltration basins, and 1 additional underground infiltration basin consisting of an 11-foot wide stone trench with 36-inch perforated 11 DPE piping to handle roof runoff on premises known as Block 132, lots 1, 3, 4, and 5. Expiration date, August 12, 2022. Mr. Pate.
Mr. Chairman, good evening. Mr. Chairman, board members, board professionals, and public, good evening. Kenneth Pape with the firm of Howell Pape, representing your applicant K-Land Corporation. Before we begin, I just want to make sure that our court reporter was on, and I see that she is. And then just procedurally, if Mr. Baer could confirm that our notices were received, are in order, and the board has jurisdiction to hear us this evening.
Yes, Mr. Pape, the notices have been received and the board has jurisdiction to hear the application.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, there are a number of people who are here with us this evening, not all of whom will testify, but if I may read off their names so that they could be admitted as panelists. Christine Cafone, our planner, is here, and we'd like to bring her in. And Steve Radosti, our architect. Carl Pankey, our traffic engineer. And Michael Marinelli, our design engineer. There are also representatives of the Kaplan organization. If you would be so kind as to admit Jason Kaplan and Brett Kaplan and Paul Kausch and Michael Sabula. And last, we have professionals who are associated with Extra Space Storage and or outside consultants who assisted our client in preparing this application. There's Aaron Lubeck and Bob Copper. If we could have those individuals raised to panelists so they're available as we're moving along. With permission, Mr. Chair, I have a brief introduction, and we're excited to go right to the substance of our presentation. This is a D1 variance request. It's a request to approve a self-storage facility to be constructed on the northwest corner of the intersection of Sunnyside and Route 9. It's a 2.61 acre parcel. It appears to have previously been homes and possibly a farm, but currently there are no structures on the site. The lands, lots 1, 3, 4, and 5 in block 132 are all in the HD1 Highway Development Zone District. We're going to ask this board to favorably consider a 3-story, 40-foot tall building. The zone permits 45, 3-story, 40-foot tall building for public storage, for self-storage purposes. Before we came to see you this evening, we spent considerable time with other representatives of the town. We've spent time with Chief Lewis. We always spend time with Chief Lewis to gain his insight and direction. I had the opportunity to meet with Shari Spiro, with others on the property. We walked the property and gained considerable information about the current conditions. Our architect, Steve Radasti, has worked with your planner for the last 5 weeks, going back and forth, designing and fine tuning the plans. We're pleased to present those plans to you this evening. I think also real significant, Charlie Cunliffe, as you know, is very focused on stormwater management. Our design team, led by Michael Marinelli, spent considerable time with Charlie to make certain that the stormwater system that we are showing conceptually is realistic and can be constructed on the property. So that's what we did before we got here this evening. Tonight, I would like to present the application as follows. The first witness is a substantive fact witness, Michael Marinelli. He's going to introduce the property and take us through what I'm going to call an executive description of the site design. The board members know this is not a site plan, it's a use variance, so full engineering hasn't occurred.
So Mr. Pape?
Yes.
So before we start, I would like for Mr. Bear to swear in the 8 or 9 witnesses you do have.
Oh.
And professional.
Sure. The witnesses that are what we intend to call are Michael Marinelli, Jason Kaplan, who is a principal of the applicant, Aaron Lubeck, who is an executive at Extra Space Storage, the company that has been retained to manage this site, Carl Pankey, who is our traffic engineer, Steve Radasti, our architect, and Christine Cafone. There are others who are here this evening. I do not intend to call them, and in the event that their testimony becomes necessary, I'll introduce them and ask to be sworn in later in the evening. Is that acceptable, Chair?
That's acceptable. Mr.
Thank
Bear?
Yes, are all the witnesses visible? I don't see Christine, but.
Christine's here.
I'm here.
Oh, there
Hi.
you are. There you go. Okay. I guess all the witnesses named, can you raise your right hand? And do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
Yes. Yes.
And then I guess I'll just go in order of the boxes as I see them on the screen. Mr. Marinelli, can you just state your name for the record and spell your last? You're muted or something.
Yeah, I had my kids running around earlier. I made sure I double muted. Michael Marinelli, Marinelli of Menlo Engineering, 261 Cleveland Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey.
Thank you. Mr. Penke.
Carl Penke, P as in Peter, EHNKE, with Langen Engineering, 989 Lennox Drive, Lawrenceville, New Jersey.
Mr. Radosti.
Yes, hi, Stephen Radosti, RADOSTI, and a principal of Perez and Radosti Associates. And my address is 379 Princeton Heights Town Road, Cranberry, New Jersey, 08512.
Ms. Cafone.
Hi, good evening. It's Christine Cafone with Cafone Consulting Group. Our address is 125 Half Mile Road, Suite 200, Red Bank, New Jersey, 07701.
Mr. Kaplan.
Jason Kaplan, principal with Kaplan Companies, spelled Kaplan, located at 433 River Road in Highland Park, New Jersey, 08904.
I think the last one's Mr. Luback.
Hey, Aaron Lubeck. It's Aaron. Last name Lubeck, Lubeck. I'm a director at Extra Space Storage. Our address is 2795 East Cottonwood Parkway, Suite 300, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84121.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think your witnesses are sworn, all of them.
Thank you. Before we proceed, board members, are we ready to move forward? Or does anyone need 5 minutes? Okay, looks like we're good. Mr. Pate?
Yes, thank you. A brief outline of where we're going this evening. Mr. Kaplan is a principal of the company. I'm going to ask that he just make a brief opening statement to the board. I'm going to then ask that Mr. Marinelli take us through some real detail of the existing conditions and the proposed design. My goal is, he's the longest presentation, and Mr. Chair, I've asked him to keep his long presentation to 20 minutes or less. We'll follow that by Mr. Aaron Lubeck of Extra Space Storage. This is a management company that the Kaplan organization went around the country looking for. They're the largest manager of these types of facilities in the United States. Their familiarity with the operation is I think, going to be very valuable to all. Carl Pankey is our traffic engineer. He's going to describe the lack of traffic associated with these facilities and the good design of Mr. Marinelli. Steve Radasti is very excited to present to you the building that he has designed with the assistance of Ms. Beam's positive guidance. And finally, Christine Cafone is the planner who has the responsibility of taking all of the facts and demonstrating that the use variance that we request has been earned. And with that, I'd ask if we could have Mr. Kaplan just join us and make an opening statement.
Sure. Thank you all for hearing our application this evening. Again, for those of you that are not familiar, we are a New Jersey-based developer, third generation. We're actually celebrating our 70th year in business this year. I did have my son next to me before. Hopefully, he's going to learn the business as well. But typically, on a project like this, the family owns the property, and we are generational holders. We are not flippers. We own for our own portfolio. We typically manage ourselves, but we are in the self-storage facility, and we brought on Extra Space because they're really best-in-class operators, and we know they run the first-class operation. So the intent here is to build, own, have Extra Space manage, and continue operations here. So we thank you for hearing our application this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan. Mr. Marinelli is our design engineer. He is sworn, but I'm going to ask if he would take a few moments to share with you his education and professional background before testifying.
Thank you, sir.
Again, Michael Marinelli from Menlo Engineering. I am the project manager for the submitted site plans. I'm a graduate of Rutgers University, class of 1999. I've been practicing land use and civil design since that time. I'm a licensed professional in the state of New Jersey, and I have been so for 17 some odd years. I provided professional testimony in front of numerous boards across the state, but I have never been in front of the Howell Township zoning board previously. I'm a licensed professional in the state of New Jersey, and my license is in good standing.
Mr. Marinelli, you're a licensed professional engineer?
That is correct.
Okay, then we just need to add that. Thank you. Your credentials are accepted, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Marinelli will testify this evening in the area of his expertise as a professional engineer. And I've asked before, earlier today, I asked if Eileen would allow screen sharing, and it's my understanding that the screen sharing capability will be given. Thank you. So Mr. Marinelli, I'm going to ask if you could, in a succinct manner, begin by introducing the aerial that is in front of the board, and if you could share with us the property's location and the surrounding uses.
Mr. Pape, if I can, has this exhibit been pre-marked?
This exhibit has been pre-marked. I'm looking through Ms. Rabano's exhibit list from today. And this is architectural plan. Use variant plans. No, preliminary architect, boundary down. I don't see it on here.
It's A17.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
A17 pre-marked.
Thank you, Mr. Pate.
Sure. If you would, Mr. Marinelli, existing conditions surrounding uses.
Sure. So the exhibit you're seeing previously marked as Exhibit A17 is entitled Existing Conditions Exhibit dated 5/11/2022. It's an aerial photo.
Can you zoom in a little bit, sir?
I may, yes. Oh. Okay, is that better?
Okay, board members, that suffice?
Yes.
Great, we're good.
So it's an aerial representation of the site and it's in existing conditions. It's a Google aerial from 2021. As you can see, the site resides on the northwest corner of Route 9, which runs up and down on the right side of the exhibit, and Sunnyside Road, which runs east and west on the lower portion of the exhibit. Sunnyside Road, as it crosses Route 9, becomes Veranda Way. The lot in question is known as Block 132, lots 1, 3, 4, and 5. It encompasses 2.61 acres and is totally resides in the HD1 highway commercial zone.
If you could,
Highway development zone.
if you could take us around the perimeter and identify the surrounding uses, please.
Sure, I just zoomed out for a split second so you could see a little bit further around the subject property. To the north, you can see is the assisted living facility. And then to the west are a couple of single family homes in the ARE2 zone. And then the remainder of the surrounding areas are mostly commercial uses along the Route 9 corridor, including a few gas stations and the Veranda Way mixed use development. The site has frontage along the off ramp of Route 9 called Ramp SB along the southeasterly line of the site. This entire frontage along Route 9 is a no access zone per DOT requirements. Again, it's a state highway. There is frontage along Sunnyside Road of approximately, I'll zoom in so everybody can see, of 63 feet, where we can gain access to the subject property.
Could we go to your next exhibit, the site plan on the air? Thank you. And here I'm going to ask if you could remind you in an executive summary fashion, just describe the project. No details, we'll come back to details.
Surely. So the applicant proposes a three-story, 79,089 square foot self-storage facility. The building is approximately 40 foot tall. We've provided, as I said, access off of Sunnyside Road via a 25-foot drive aisle with 20 90-degree parking spaces, a one-way circulation around the eastern, northern, and western side, which would access loading doors for the self-storage facility. You can also see we've penciled in areas for infiltration and detention along the south and eastern side. And we've maintained the wooded area along the northern and western sides where there is a 50-foot residential buffer.
If you could take us to your next exhibit, I believe the site plan itself. Am I correct?
The amended site plan?
Oh, thank you. If you take us to the amended site plan, board members, during the course of reviewing this project with your professionals, we learned that the footprint of our building was creating variances that if our client reduced the size of the building could be eliminated. And Mr. Marinelli, if you could, using that red line drawing, which if you could just describe the footprint revisions And then with permission, we'll go back to the colored site plan to make the balance of the presentation.
And you just want to identify the exhibit?
Yeah, I was going to say, can we label them so that I know what I'm referring to? So the rendered site plan on the aerial use variance plan exhibit. What?
Eileen, the number for that one?
Eileen?
Eileen, do you have the number for the?
It's A16.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And the redlined version of the site plan?
I believe we entitled it revised use variance plan exhibit, if that
It's
helps, Eileen.
A15.
Thank you. So, Mr. Marinelli, using A15, if you could identify
Sure.
the revisions that
Real
were
quickly, I'll refer to exhibit A16. What you'll note in the submitted rendered site plan is there was an area of green between the proposed curb line and the residential buffer that was to remain. Subsequent to the review of your professionals, we found that no disturbance was to happen within that 5 feet or within that residential buffer, including any land disturbance related to grading and light poles, fencing, things of that nature. And so we took the opportunity to revise the site plan and show that if we were to reduce the building footprint by 5 feet on both the north, and now I'm referring to exhibit A15, which is again, the revised use variance plan exhibit dated 5/11/2022. If we were to reduce the footprint of the proposed self-storage facility 5 feet on both the north side and the west side, we would be able to bring all disturbances and amenities, including the catch basins and the fencing and the perimeter landscape out of that 50-foot residential buffer. That building would total 73,839 square feet, which is again 3 stories over a 24,613 square foot building footprint.
Mr. Marinelli, thank you. And to the board, please consider the applicant's request to be so amended, and please consider the revisions shown by Mr. Marinelli to be part of the commitment of the applicant to the board. Now, if we return to A16, knowing that there's a slight dimensional change that will be on the final plan, if you could use this to take us through just a couple of things I'd ask that you focus on. One is that if you could confirm that you've spent some time working with Mr. Charlie Cunliffe on the stormwater, and that it's your understanding that the conceptual stormwater design that you've presented is in fact acceptable to his office.
That is correct.
And I would, at any time, if Mr. Cunliffe wants to jump in and comment, we certainly will take no umbrage. I think the most important things that you can tell the board about the stormwater system at a use variance concept plan is that it will be designed to be 100% compliant with the DEP requirements that came out in 2021. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And it'll be 100% compliant with the township stormwater management requirements. Is that correct?
That is also correct.
And I think significantly, this stormwater system will not be a burden on the township. It will be owned and operated by the property owner, subject to the terms of an operations and maintenance manual that will ultimately be reviewed by Mr. Cunliffe and recorded against the property in a covenant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Fine. Could you just give the board a sense of what type of grading would be necessary to create this site as you're presenting it to the board?
Fortunately, the site is relatively flat, so there won't be any real significant grade change required on site to develop this parcel. What you will see there are retaining walls that surround the infiltration basins on the southern and eastern side. These walls range from 3 feet to 5 feet, but they're not visible from any frontage because they're cut walls for the excavation of the proposed infiltration basins.
Going to ask if you could confirm that this property is one of those unusual properties that has no environmental constraints, no wetlands, no buffers, no streams, no bodies of water, and no flood hazard areas. Are all of those accurate statements?
That is correct.
I'm going to ask if you could confirm that representatives from your firm participated in the site inspection with Shari Spiro, where the quality and characteristics of the trees on site were identified.
That is correct.
And the trees that are saved include some of the areas where there's mature and healthy oak forest area, particularly between us and the residential building to the north.
That is accurate, yes.
Mr. Pape?
Yes.
Before you, you touched an area.
Sure.
Where there's going to be some clear cutting. So I'd like to bring Ms. Spiro in and hear what she has to offer with regards to what's going to be removed, how are we going to mitigate, what are the contributions, etc.
Very fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Spiro?
Sure. So I just want to point out the property to the west, that residential home, I think somewhat recently, excuse me, they cleared. Excuse me. So it is much more open over there than it looks. So their 50-foot buffer near the home, it does not have trees on the other side. So the buffer then along the west side of the property, it will need to be enhanced. You can see the darker areas, those areas on there are probably open. That section of the site is just thinner than the area closer to Route 9.
So Ms. Spiro, anyone that's on an acre or more of property has to get a permit before they pull down trees, correct?
I don't handle any of the residential permits.
but that is
I don't
an
know
ordinance.
what, I'm just letting you know, it's not a treat over there.
It's a lawn.
Yeah, it's a wide open lawn. I don't, I don't handle
Mr.
any
Aguirre?
permitting. What?
Mr. Aguirre will make note.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then Mr. Pape mentioned the retaining walls. We didn't talk about that along the ramp. It's hard to tell exactly what trees will be able to be saved along the ramp, just because if they're going to install retaining wall, you're going to have to cut down. I don't want the roots disturbed too much. So, the picture is shadow. So I can't tell for sure how much will be saved in the front. I know they would like to save in the front. Just the concern would be where the retaining wall falls and installing that.
Well, Shari, I mean, it's not just retaining walls, there's a base in there.
Well, right. But the way the picture shows, it looks like there's trees there along the ramp, but a lot of that is shadow.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure that any of them are going to be saved.
I'm kind of thinking that's not going to be possible with putting walls there. I really don't, so there are
walls, it's walls and basins, right?
Right. I'm talking between the wall and the ramp.
Yeah.
Yeah, that area. There are existing white pine trees there. So it's possible that that row closest to the ramp could stay, but I'm just not sure how much of the actual oak forest will stay on that side of the ramp. But certainly we do have to look into enhancing the buffer that is existing.
And what is the amount of clearing that's going to be accomplished here?
I haven't been provided the information yet. I don't know what their acreage of clearing is.
Okay, so it's a 2.1 acre lot. And,
So
2.6.
Right. So if it's 2 acres, that's $70,000 of clearing.
Yeah.
And then whatever their landscape, plan shows can be deducted off of that number.
If we could, Ms. Spiro, if you could just describe how the center of the property shows that it was previously developed and cleared, and that grows
Right.
into the secondary.
Yeah, I had mentioned also in my letter, the center area of the site, it does look very wooded from that aerial view, but when you're walking it, a lot of it is regeneration. It's new sweet gum trees in the center there that are undersized. They're growing very close together, so they provide that canopy like you see, but there is a chunk that will not fall as into the requirement of replacement trees because they're just undersized. So I would expect their acreage of clearing to be under 2 acres actually, because we
Thank
have to deduct that area out since they're not trees there.
And Mr. Chair, our goal is to landscape the property wherever possible with enhancements to the buffers and to landscape around the perimeter. And to the extent that we can do that in a responsible manner, that is our goal. To the extent that there's greater trees required to be replaced, we would ask for permission to participate in the tree fund.
Thank you, Mr. Pape.
Thank you.
I mean, that's a waiver, Ken, so you're gonna have to formally request a waiver to provide, to go into the tree fund. It's not just, we're looking to, you have to submit, you have to formally request a waiver. The board has to approve a waiver for you to pay into the tree fund.
I think, thank you for the clarification. I would indicate if this project progresses to site plan, and we hope that we earn that right, we would agree to do the formal woodland management plan, calculate the trees, create a landscape plan, and request a waiver for that which didn't fit. If I may proceed, Mr. Chair?
You may proceed, Mr. Pape.
Thank you. I'm going to ask if you could, Michael, if you could briefly describe, knowing that Carl Penke's coming up, if you could briefly describe the on-site circulation system, the locations of parking, and the locations of building loading.
So before we get there, Ken, can we talk
Sure.
about the buffer requirement that you do not meet,
Sure.
which is along the
Mr.
frontage of the property?
Sure. I think I can safely say, Mr. Chair, that we have a technical violation of the buffer to a residential community. Between us and the mixed-use community on the far side of the highway, there's a residential element to that apartment community. Between us is Highway 9, and yet a strict reading of the ordinance says that we are within 50 feet of that use. And I believe it's a technical requirement that we must have a 50-foot wide buffer between our site and that project, ignoring the fact that Route 9 is present.
Well,
That's-
yes, I mean, technically, the ordinance doesn't differentiate across Route 9 from across from any other street.
Yeah.
So if there is a residentially zoned property across the street, you're required to provide a 50-foot buffer. I do think, Mr. Chairman, as we've seen recently with the truck application that was a little farther north on Route 9, yes, technically they need relief, and I just don't want to jump over it. That's the only reason, Ken, and why I'm bringing it up.
Appreciate it.
Technically, they need relief. There's basins there, there's retaining walls there. Even I think that drive aisle is probably within 50 feet of the property line. It's on the ramp, which is not even really technically on Route 9, across Route 9. And then, as you're aware, Verdana is zoned mixed use, so there's a residential component, except for if you read the zoning, the residential piece has to be set back, I think, like 200 feet from the road. So the front component is supposed to be commercial anyway.
Yep.
So I just wanted to put it on the record, Ken. I'm not looking to make an issue out of it, that technically they need relief for that. The basins and the walls in the front that are quote unquote within the 50-foot buffer. However, I think they're about 400 feet from the nearest residential use. So I would take no exception to the relief that they're requesting, but I just want to make sure you actually request the relief.
Thank you. Because it falls into the category that Ms. Cofone can speak to, the facts are now before the board. The presentation will come from Ms. Cofone later.
So, and Ken, just to add on to that too with the buffer discussion. So the property to the south, so the gas station is HD1, but there's a part of the R3 across Sunnyside Road, which is residential zone and use. So there's like half the frontage, that little, if you want to zoom in there, half the small frontage where your site driveway comes through would technically have a 50-foot buffer across it. Now the ordinance does allow for like site driveways to be within a 50-foot buffer, utilities for to service the site and things like that. Along with the driveway, there's some conveyance to collect runoff from the site driveway, so it's not freely flowing onto Sunnyside Road without any reductions. I would say to the board, as far as that conveyance system, I take no issue with it. I think it's a better alternative than allowing 100 foot of a driveway just to free flow onto Sunnyside Road without any, you know, stormwater management reductions and water quality and things like that. So I just want to point that out before we, you know, move on from the buffers.
Thank you, Charlie.
Board members, I just want to make sure you're making note of both of those technicalities.
I'm good with them. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So noted, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Pate?
Chair, if I may return to Mr. Marinelli.
You may.
Good. Mr. Marinelli, we were just very briefly to grade this site to accommodate the development. If you could just give the board an executive summary of flat level, what's necessary to prepare the site.
So as I said before, the site in its existing condition is relatively flat, and we wouldn't, because we're putting in a footprint in the center of the site, we wouldn't be drastically changing grade through the site. As far as circulation goes, there's a full access two-way 25-foot wide drive aisle that accesses Sunnyside Road on the southwest corner of the site. That driveway heads north to the front of the building, where you make a right turn towards the east. There are 20 perpendicular 19 by 10-foot parking spaces along that two-way 25-foot wide drive aisle. As you continue along Route 9 in the northerly direction, there is the proposed access gates with keypad. This entry will allow you to the secured area where the garage door locations are, as well as the main entrance for the upper floors on the western facade. You'll hear more detail on that from the architect. This eastern, northern, and western portions of the building are proposed to have a security gate around them. On the eastern side, the drive aisle continues 20-foot wide between the building and curb line. In meeting with the fire official, we went through several iterations where it was requested that we gore stripe the corners of the proposed structure to make sure nobody parks or loads in those areas, to make sure that there's adequate space for emergency vehicles to circulate the building in an emergency. You can see that 20-foot access continues around the northeast corner of the building and then widens to 30 feet. And the purpose of that on both the north and western side is if there were a truck or car there loading and unloading into the garage doors, there would still be ample room for emergency vehicles to get by. On the northwest corner, we proposed a dumpster area or garbage enclosure. This is a masonry, or it will be detailed during site plan, but we intend for it to be a masonry enclosure on that northwest corner with ample access for the trash vehicle. As we continue around the northwest corner of the building and head south back towards the entrance, again, we're providing that 30-foot width where there are proposed overhead doors. And then as you get to the southwest corner of the building are the proposed one-way exit security gates that will lead you back to the main entrance drive on Sunnyside Road. In essence, the entire site on the north northern and western sides are considered loading areas. Again, as I said, there's ample width to have both loading in those areas as well as circulated traffic. I believe we also submitted, and I'm not sure what if it's been pre-numbered, a truck movement plan. Can someone confirm if this exhibit was pre-marked? It is called truck movement plan.
It was submitted to Eileen on Friday. Eileen, if you could give us that number.
It's A14.
Thank you.
Okay, so exhibit A14 is the truck movement plan. This is an exhibit showing a fire truck both entering and exiting the site, utilizing the 25-foot wide drive aisle on the southwest corner, as well as the southern and southeastern sides, circulating the building. It does go through the gore areas, which the fire official had requested, but shows that a fire truck or emergency vehicle would be able to fully circulate the site with the proposed dimensions of the drive aisles.
Mr. Marinelli, if I could just, while you have this up, ask a clarifying question. So there's a couple areas along the frontage where it looks like the sweep of the fire truck go over the curb. Is that just, sloppy CAD work? Or
it is. It is. We had thrown this together, at the last minute. Yes, it's. We can clean that up so that those maneuvers can be maintained, and the vehicle body won't, in fact, encroach the curb line.
So
we were more concerned with the northeast and northwest corners to show that even with the dumpster location in the northwest corner, the largest of the emergency vehicles would still be able to circulate the site.
Okay. And then should the board rule favorably on the use, the applicant will provide an amended copy of this as part of the site plan submission?
That is correct, yes.
And then this might not be a question that you can answer, it might be something from the architect, but do you know from a building perspective, is this required to be sprinklered?
It will be sprinklered and the architect will so testify.
Okay, so I think that's important for the board to note too. It's a building that's going to be sprinklered. So while this can show that a fire truck can circulate the site with the 30-foot around the north and the west, going back to Mr. Mallon's days with the board, he always tells me a story about a truck from the Southern Fire Company pulling up too close to a building and actually, burning itself, alive kind of thing. So while this can show that a fire truck can circulate the site, I think it's important that the building will be sprinklered. So, I don't know that a fire truck will actually physically maneuver around this site in the event of a fire, but this demonstrates that it can. And then just from an emergency access perspective, ambulances, I think fire code requires a minimum 20-foot wide two-way cartway. So even with the gore striping, they've got 20-foot wide one way. So, even if it's not a fire truck, it should be accessible for, ambulances and other kind of emergency vehicles. So I think that's important for the board's perspective. You can continue, Mr. Marinelli.
Well, I appreciate that clarification. Yeah, we were showing the fire truck as the most conservative of the emergency vehicles, obviously, but that lends to ambulances also being able to maneuver the site, box trucks and delivery vehicles to be able to enter and exit the site. We're not proposing that any tractor trailers be able to access and maneuver at this location.
There'll be further testimony on that from Mr. Pankey. If you could talk a little bit about the landscaping and the lighting. The landscaping plan that we have is strictly conceptual, Mr. Chair and board members. I've asked that Mr. Marinelli confirm that he's reviewed the staff reports and the guidance, the conceptual guidance and direction that appears in your staff's reports with regard to landscaping will be followed at the time of a site plan application, if we're so fortunate as to progress. Mr. Marinelli, if you just briefly confirm those statements.
That is correct. In both as it relates to lighting and landscape, we're confident that the comments that we received from your board professionals, both planner and engineer, that we'll be able to address those during site plan.
I think it's important for the board to hear and for you to say that you will design this site with lighting fixtures that have backside shields that there'll be no spillage of light from our property onto our neighbor's property, and that you will design this system to be consistent with the guidance of the township's lighting ordinance.
We will, yes.
I'm going to ask if you could briefly talk about signage. I think that the signage is only on the building with the application that's pending. There's no ground-mounted signs shown on the plan. We recognize that if we have ground-mounted signs and facade signs, it triggers variance relief. We want to be upfront with the board. We do envision at a site plan designing a ground-mounted sign at the entrance, but there's no signage on this, no ground-mounted signage on this plan to review with you this evening. Mr. Marinelli, if you could confirm the accuracy of that statement.
That's correct.
And you do need variances for signage.
We
based
do
on what
need
you said.
variances for the signs that are on the building, correct?
Yes.
We'll be back to that with Mr. Radasti. This building has one identification sign, and then it has, I'm going to call customer convenience signs, an office and a loading sign. It simply says office and loading, but the number of signs goes to 3 and this variance is required.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, other than to ask that Mr. Marinelli confirm that he has reviewed all of the staff reports that have been generated to date, and that he is comfortable that he can and he will, if given the opportunity, prepare a site plan that incorporates the guidance and direction from those reports.
That is correct.
I have nothing further of Mr. Marinelli. I look to you, Mr. I remind all that the reason Mr. Marinelli's testimony is so brief is this is a use variance plan without full engineering. His testimony would be considerably longer when we're discussing the engineered items that we just went through conceptually. He is available if there's any questions of him from the board or your board professionals.
Thank you. Mr. Marinelli?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You know, rather than asking our own engineer, I'll ask you. You know, this is a 3-story building.
That is correct.
What's the purpose of a 3-story building? Most of these storage buildings that we have are singular in its level, you know, single level. So are we putting air conditioning? Are we climate controlling? What's going on here?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, that's for the architect and operations to testify to. But yes, it's climate controlled, but if that's their testimony, would that be acceptable?
1 second, Charlie? You know, Charlie?
Yeah, so as far as from, obviously the height and the number of stories, I believe that what they're proposing conforms with the ordinance. Obviously, it's a use variance though. So, I mean, the board can consider that in the summation for the use as a whole. From a parking perspective, what they've provided on site complies with what's required for warehousing / storage. So as far as the site parking, it can accommodate what's being proposed. Having said that, it is a use variance. They have made the concession to shrink the building back a little bit to not, impact the buffer. But, having said that, it still is a tight site. It is
Charlie,
a unique.
Yeah, Charlie, that's exactly my point. I mean, where are all the mechanicals going to go? Have we really thought this through? Is there going to be a large, package unit sitting outside, piped in, or is it there's going to be stuff on the roof? I don't understand. We're packing this in pretty tight, and I'd like to know what we're doing here.
With your permission, Mr. Chair, we could go out of, we had an order plan, but nothing's cast in stone. And we could bring Mr. Radasti and go through all that building design elements, and mechanicals and height. And would that be appropriate at this time?
Before we get there,
Go ahead.
There's a waiver that's necessary for the circulation aisle. So typically we require 35 feet. And the circulation aisle is 20 feet. So that's an engineering issue, not an architectural issue.
Sure. We did review the layout that's before you with Chief Lewis, and Chief Lewis did find it to be acceptable. He did require that we return to him with a site plan application. Mr. Pankey can testify to the adequacy of that design.
And Mr. Chair, before we move on past the engineer, I just want to bring up a couple more things. So the applicant does need a waiver for not providing any sidewalk along the property frontage, and also private sidewalk from the site to the public sidewalk in the right of way. Obviously, this is on NJDOT right away. So should the board require it, would be subject to NJDOT review and approval. If DOT were to kick it back, then the applicant would have to make a contribution to the sidewalk trust fund. Ken, would the applicant have any issue with that?
None whatsoever.
So I'm just gonna jump in on sidewalk. I think there should be sidewalk provided along Route 9. We have required sidewalk on every other application on Route 9, and the DOT has never kicked it back. There's a NJ Transit route that runs right along this area. People walk continuously along Route 9.
And they're bike riding, Jen.
Yes, and they need sidewalks. So I'm not an advocate for the contribution. I want the sidewalk.
No, and I agree with that, Jen, and that wasn't the point that I was making.
No, I agree with you, Charlie. I'm
Yeah.
just saying, like, I just want the board to be very aware. I'm not an advocate of the contribution. They should be putting in the sidewalk.
Duly noted, and we'll follow that guidance, given the opportunity to do so.
Jen, or somebody, do we know if there's a bus stop on that corner?
There's a bus stop on the following corner, but it doesn't even matter, because if you look along Route 9, there's a dirt path that people walk constantly. And so the reason they walk on the grass is because we do not have sidewalks. So there has never been an issue where the DOT has pushed back on us asking, as long as it's 4-foot wide concrete sidewalk, the DOT is perfectly fine with sidewalk being installed. So
No, I agree with you. I was thinking for a bus stop, it'd be good to have a sidewalk.
I think it's on the other side of the intersection, honestly.
Okay.
But
that's
it's
fine.
right there, yes.
Yeah, agreed.
If I could, Ms. Beam, I think that we have a 20-foot drive aisle, one-way drive aisle, and I believe the standard was 30 feet. I think that you may have said 35 feet. Could we confirm it's 30?
30, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
So, and just to keep going, Mr. Chair, so we cited also the applicant, the ordinance restricts fences and walls in the front yard area to be no higher than 4 feet. So you did hear Mr. Marinelli talk about the retaining wall, how it's, greater than 4 feet, but it is essentially recessed below grade. So it still does need a technical variance for that. And then I would also note, obviously, 5-foot drop down from grade to the bottom of the basin. Our recommendation would be the basin have fencing around it just for safety purposes, especially with some, residential uses and, the discussion about sidewalk along the frontage. I would recommend that the board require that as a condition. It just, with the caveat that it would also require, variance relief, because it would be at the top of the wall. So it would be effectively, 9 feet of wall and fence total. So I think from a safety perspective, it's warranted. Regarding loading and minimum loading requirements, can the applicant, you'll have someone from the storage talk about how the site's anticipated to function and things from that perspective?
I intended Mr. Pankey to do that portion, but we also have Mr. Lubeck available. Together, I think we'll get a good description of the operation.
Okay. And then should the applicant, should the board rule favorably and this goes to a site plan, I just request that the applicant provide site triangles for the site driveway and just demonstrate that there's no obstruction, no fencing, no retaining wall, greater than 30 inches in height to obstruct, someone coming off the southbound ramp on a Sunnyside Road, causing a traffic issue. And then just to summarize for the board, the applicant did submit numerous iterations of a stormwater management design. So this is what you're seeing on here is 95% of, if the board rules favorably, this is what you're going to see from a stormwater management perspective. There's some site plan things that would need to get cleaned up with riprap. They're indicated as item number, I think, B26 in my letter. Mr. Marinelli, you're confident that you could address that as site plan?
Yes.
And that's really all I have from an engineering perspective, Mr. Chair. I'll reserve some questions for architect and traffic.
Thank you, Charlie. Charlie, question, the basins as designed here, 50, 100, 20, what do we got?
So it complies with the updated stormwater management rules adopted in 2021 and also the Township Stormwater Control Ordinance. So they meet the rate reductions for the 2, 10, 100-year storm. The basins are both green infrastructure, which is a requirement. They're also meeting the groundwater recharge requirement with the infiltration basins. And then also water quality because it's an infiltration basin. So this isn't just a hashed out area on the plans. They gave us detailed stormwater management calculations. I required that as this being such a tight site to demonstrate that they could physically design it to meet the rules. So I'm satisfied with this at this point from a stormwater management perspective.
Thank you, Charlie. Mr. Pape?
May we proceed, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
So our plan at this point was to introduce Mr. Lubeck and discuss the management and operation before going to architecture and traffic. But I would defer to you if you wish to hear them in any different order. They're all prepared and ready to testify this evening.
You know, Mr. Pape, we're asking for a lot here, right? And some of them are technical, some are non-technical. And, you know, for my fellow board members, you know, due diligence is paramount in understanding what it is that's being presented to us. And with our professionals' augmented support and professional advice, you know, we're looking at this. And I would ask my board members and Mr. Hughes, Mr. Cantor, Mr. Mertens, etc. You know, do we want to go to the architect next? Or do we want to go to the traffic next? What would you like to see, guys?
Thank you for.
I think to hear from the applicant himself, because this is a use variance, that's my biggest thing is, like you were saying, Paul, it's a tight spot. So I want to know why this site is suitable for this storage. And I think that's where I'm sure all these technical parts of it's going to be resolved, but that's where I'm coming from.
Roger, Mr. Mertens. So Mr. Pape, there you got it.
Okay. So Aaron Lubeck is an executive with Extra Space Storage. Extra Space Storage is the company that the Kaplan organization has selected to provide professional management of the site. What I intended to do with Mr. Lubeck is to ask that he briefly describe his company and his company's national presence, and to give you a sense of their rating on a national basis, and then to ask him for certain guidance points that he has already provided to our clients. I don't know that he will provide all of the answers about the design of the site. I think that will come further from Mr. Radasti, but with your permission, I'll introduce to you Mr. Aaron Lubeck. He has been sworn. He's not offered as an expert, but as someone who is in the industry. I'll ask that he describe his position in the industry and at Extra Space Storage, and then offer his testimony. Mr. Lubeck, if we could have him brought onto the screen.
I think I'm on.
Okay.
Good evening.
There you are. Mr. Lubeck, you've been sworn. If you could share with the board members and the public your position at Extra Space Storage, and then tell us a little bit about what you do and a little bit about the company.
Yeah, well, thank you. Good evening. Thanks for having me. So I represent Extra Space Storage. Extra Space is a national brand public company specializing in the operations of storage nationwide. We operate over 2,000 properties across the country. We're the largest management company in the self-storage industry. I've been with the company 8 years. My responsibility is to work with different developers across the country that are our partners, like Kaplan, to determine whether or not we manage their store and if it's a good fit for our platform. So we are involved in the feasibility part of it, determining whether it's makes sense to do a storage property in a particular location. And we have done that here with our own data. And we also recommend that Kaplan do that with an independent consultant, which they have already done as well with Bob Copper. But we've done our analysis here, like the location, like the facility. As a company, as I mentioned, we own about 1,000 stores. We are a property manager for just over another 1,000 in terms of our size. So we're a Class A, best-in-class operator. You can look us up online as a public company and see our performance. A couple points to bring up in terms of what I think what usually is thought about with storage in terms of security and those type of things. Extra space facility like this, most of the time we'll have 2 people on site managers. Our normal office hours are 6 days a week, 9:30 to 6 are the office hours. Outside of office hours, we have access hours, which is standardized, and that's 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. So those are the hours that the tenants can go on site. In addition to that, as has been mentioned, the site, our specifications that we give to Kaplan as the developer require good security, so there are specifications on lighting as well as controlled access. So tenants can operate, can get into the property with a code once they sign a lease. And that is all tracked. So we know who is on the property at what time. There are cameras at all the access points so that, again, tenants know that they're on camera. And that's all recorded to a DVR. Once tenants go into the office, they see all the cameras there, so they know they're being filmed. So those are some of the controls. The site managers themselves do sweeps of the property first thing in the morning and at night and throughout the day to make sure that things are operating as they should. The leases that tenants sign are specific in nature of what, we follow the Self-Storage Association guidelines for the state of New Jersey with that. And, tenants are not allowed to store hazardous materials or things like that. And so all those standards are in our spec book, which we share with Kaplan, and we make sure are part of the development. So
I have a couple of what might sound like off the wall questions, but I think they're important to answer. So each rental unit, are there any utilities? Is there any plumbing or electricity in any of these units?
No, that's the nice thing about storage is that, there is a restroom on site, but there is not plumbing in the units. There are not electrical outlets in the units. Lighting is motion censored. And so tenants do not have the ability to plug stuff in or things like that. And that of course deters people trying to stay in the unit.
Do you have a prohibition in your lease on occupancy? Someone cannot sleep over in this space?
Correct. Tenants are not allowed to stay in the property after hours.
And do you have a prohibition that prevents people from using these spaces as their, I'm going to call it their home business, where they operate a business on a daily basis?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, people can store things there, but they can't run a business out of the unit.
And here's a random one, but it's occurred in there. Do you have a prohibition on there being social events or parties?
Yeah, that's not allowed, right? So again, there's access is controlled through a code. So the site managers will do their sweeps, but we will also see if somebody entered a code a bunch of times and got a bunch of people in, then we would see that first thing the next morning and evict the tenant.
Yeah. Would you see it in real time? Are the cameras running in real time?
The cameras are running in real time and recorded to a DVR. It's not monitored 24 hours, but we would see that.
Very fine. And would it be a safe statement that with 2,000 facilities nationwide and a company that's 50 years old, that you're actively engaged in not only implementing state-of-the-art systems, but creating them in the industry.
That is accurate.
And that's a good description of who Extra Space Storage is.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chair, those were the questions I had for Mr. Lubeck. Any questions of Mr. Lubeck, you're going to be talking about his favorite topic. So if there are any further questions about operations, I'm certain that he's looking forward to answering them.
Mr. Martins?
Yeah, Mr. Lubeck, my first, really the main question I have is, have you looked at other sites on Route 9 where you might have a little more space to work with?
So in this case, and it is in all cases, Extra Space, we are a manager of the facility, right? We are not actively involved in finding the sites. Sites are brought to us, right? So in this case, Kaplan found the location, controls it, and brought it to us. We were not involved in looking at other locations up and down Route 9. This was the site that was selected, and we analyzed it and determined this would work. Some of the concerns have been brought up. I mean, storage is placed on a lot of unique different parcels. This site, for me, is not a concern in terms of the size and the multi-story aspect. And actually, as was brought up earlier, single-story properties are kind of first generation, and these three-story facilities are really what are being built today. So to answer your question, we did not look at other sites, but this site, given the drive lanes around, is not a concern to us.
Okay, well, we can address that later. Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Lubeck? So you have a lessee that comes in, they lease a facility on the 3rd floor. How do they get their product from ground to the 3rd story?
Have to be really strong. No, so there's elevators, right? The property will have 2 elevators, and there are carts provided in the loading areas. And with the development of the site, the larger spaces are on the ground floor. So your 10 by 30s and 10 by 20s. So people who are storing beds and couches oftentimes need those bigger spaces, and the smaller size units are on the upper floors. And so it is manageable with carts and elevators to get their stuff there.
So it's a freight, the elevator is a freight type elevator of nature, or just a regular passenger elevator?
It's a heavier duty elevator, right? It's bigger and has more capacity.
Yeah. Mr. Stanton?
I have nothing.
Mr. Cantor?
No, you've asked all the questions. I'm good.
Mr. Hughes?
Nope, I have a couple of traffic questions, but I'm good with Mr. Lubeck. Thank you.
Mr. Gonzalez?
No, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Roscoe? He's shaking his head.
Nope, nope.
Okay, Mr. Pape, all yours.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just before I just want to ask 2
Yes.
clarifying questions. I apologize. I didn't want
No.
to cut you off before you ran through everyone. Mr. Lubeck, so you said for access for lessees 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Is that the same 6 days a week as the managers, or is that 7 days a week?
7 days a week.
7 days a week. Okay, so it'd be on Sundays as well.
Correct.
And then as far as there's no intent to have any type of like portable storage rentals where they can be shipped off site and brought back, or like rentals of U-Haul or any type of moving type vehicles or anything from the site?
That's correct. We don't have U-Hauls on our properties, and we also don't do shipping elsewhere. All storage is done on site.
Okay, and then the 2 managers, are they concurrent on a day, or are they in 2 shifts? You said 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Correct. So I got to look and see the exact number of hours per week. That depends on the size of the facility, but there will be several days a week where there's double coverage, and some times where there's single coverage.
Okay, so that 4-hour gap, I guess, in the evening, and then the 3.5-hour gap in the morning, that's all controlled, remotely or monitored remotely with the cameras and alarm systems and the gated access with the code panel and all that kind of stuff, correct?
Correct.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Charlie. Jan?
No, sir.
All good. Okay.
Very briefly, Mr. Lubeck's made accurate statements, but I would like to take it one step further. We do not propose any outdoor storage of vehicles, trailers, pods, zero outdoor storage. All storage is proposed within the four corners of the building. And that's somewhat distinguishes this proposal from others that have those additional services.
Ken, I apologize. I had one more thing. I knew I was missing one thing. So if lessee's term expires and they're not up to date with their payments and stuff like that, and they foreclose on the unit, does the applicant have auctions? And then how often does that occur? Are they on site? How many people do you anticipate coming to the site?
Yeah. So yeah, all the leases are monthly, and Extra Space will conduct auctions when needed. We do a pretty good job of collecting that. Even through the pandemic, there was not a lot of those, but it really depends on the property, how often those auctions are needed. It can be as often as monthly, but we'll not have those if not needed. We do a combination of online auctions and in-person auctions, but it's Storage Wars is a show out there that shows that those are big events. In reality, they're not.
So I guess you say you got two managers on the site, and you could potentially have some visitors as well. But on a storage event, I mean, I think you got 20 or so parking spaces, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's more than enough to accommodate what would come in that type of event.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, and just by way of going further into that, I mean, it's a low traffic use. Our standard for properties is 6 to 8 parking spaces are typically all that are required. So 20 would be more than enough.
All right. That's all I have at this time. I promise this time.
No, you're good, Charlie. It's all yours.
Fine. We have Carl Pankey, our traffic engineer, who I intend to call next, and Steve Radasi, our architect. Is there any preference of the board as to whom you'd like to hear next?
Well, I'll let Mr. Cantor make that decision.
I'd like to go with the traffic, Mr. Saya.
Okay, traffic it is then, Mr. Page.
Okay, appreciate your guidance. Carl Pankey is our traffic expert. He is sworn. I'm going to ask if he could take a few moments to share with you his background, his professional and educational background, and then I'll ask that you accept him as an expert, and we'll continue. Mr.
Sure.
Pankey.
So again, for the record, this is Carl Pankey with Langen Engineering and Environmental Services. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from Civil Engineering with Villanova University. I am a registered professional engineer in the state of New Jersey in good standing, as well as in several other states. I've been practicing for over 37 years. I have appeared before this board and the planning board in Howell on previous occasions. My area of expertise is traffic engineering.
Sir, we accept your credentials.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pankey, I'm going to ask, did you author the traffic report that was submitted with this application?
I did.
And have you had an opportunity to review the plans that have been presented and with a focus on the truck movement plan and the site plan? Just want to make certain that you're familiar with those. And I'm going to ask that Mike Marinelli be given control of the screen again, and following your guidance, he'll bring those screens up for you.
I have.
Okay. So I'm going to ask if you could confirm the driveway aisles are adequate, that the driveway aisles are of adequate width and will function safely. If you could talk about that, especially in light of the questions that have been brought to the applicant's attention earlier this evening.
Certainly. I think Mr. Marinelli gave a very good description of the site circulation and operation. But again, very quickly, coming in from Sunnyside Avenue, we have a 25-foot wide access driveway providing two-way operation, which as it comes in about a third of the way to the site meets the parking aisle, which peels off to the right, which remains two-way, 25 feet, with perpendicular parking striped at 10 feet by 19 feet in accordance with your requirements. That two-way operation basically continues around the easterly side of the building and to the point where the controlled access gate exists. And then the drive aisle becomes a one-way operation. Along the eastern side of the building, it is a 20-foot wide drive aisle. And then along the north and western faces of the building, it is a 30-foot basically cartway striped with a 20-foot aisle and a 10-foot basically pull-off loading or parking area adjacent to the building garages. This is a very typical layout for self-storage, multi-story self-storage buildings. It is a functional layout. Basically, as you come into the business, you have parking spaces provided, which provide access to the leasing office and the front door for passenger cars. And then for those that have leased the space, you have access to the gated area, which provides access to those that have leased the larger ground floor units that are accessed by garage doors or via the elevators and the service loading area along the western port of the building. You have an example of this in town, a similar building, 3-story building, recently constructed to the north. It is larger. It has probably twice as many units, but that's the U-Haul facility that was constructed up in that location. So this isn't dissimilar in functional layout to that particular layout. And again, it's fairly standard now in the industry with regard to these layouts. Mr. Marinelli did share a layout and circulation by a fire truck, which is a very large vehicle. It would represent basically the largest type vehicle that would access this facility. Typically, you'll see box trucks of various sizes, U-Hauls, people delivering stuff, SUVs, vans, the occasional maybe car with a trailer, U-Haul trailer. All of those vehicles can adequately circulate this site. So from a functional standpoint, I think the site's well laid out and can accommodate the types of vehicles that enter and exit on a daily basis. The 20 parking spaces provided meets your ordinance, and it's more than adequate based upon data published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers for self-storage facilities. I would expect no more than about 8 vehicles peak, average peak parked at any one time. So the 20 spaces provided is more than adequate for the day-to-day functioning of this facility.
Just so that the record is complete, would you confirm that the trash removal vehicles, all anticipated emergency vehicles, can be accommodated as designed?
Yes, and again, we'll be back before this board, assuming that the board gives us a positive direction on this with site plan approval, and Mr. Marinelli will be further addressing that at the time of site plan.
Earlier, Mr. Marinelli indicated that this site does not handle the articulated tractor trailer. If you could just indicate appropriate signage and location of appropriate signage so that that condition doesn't happen on site.
Yeah, we can work with the board professionals. Self-storage facilities don't typically attract WB50, WB67 type vehicles. That's not what the people that lease these facilities are using. So we could work with the professionals to put a proper notification at the entrance without oversigning this property. But I think from its function, it doesn't concern me that that type of vehicle would even try to enter the site, nor do I believe that the operator would be leasing to somebody or suggesting to a leasee that they can enter the site with a tractor trailer.
Ken, would the applicant be amenable to agreeing to a condition of no tractor trailers?
Yes, we're offering that. Yes, Mr.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
And then just I want to add a couple just clarifying questions with Mr. Pankey. So I think Mr. Marinelli brought up obviously along the Route 9 frontage, it's that southbound off ramp. That entire frontage is access restricted from DOT. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's what's known as a no access line that was established when the forward jug handle was constructed. So the only non-controlled access is the 63 feet that's along Sunnyside. That's actually outside of both DOT's jurisdiction, and it's beyond the no access line. So that location is our legal frontage for any development on this property.
And then just as an item of clarification, so even though you don't have access on DOT, I think the applicant's proposing their stormwater to drain into the DOT conveyance system, so we'll still have to, at site plan, get any DOT approvals for same. That's accurate?
Yeah, Mr. Marinelli would need to proceed and obtain what's known as a drainage permit from NJDOT for any outfall connections to the state's drainage system. And they will review the on-site drainage probably more intensively than you. Based upon Ms. Beam's recommendation that the board does not waive the installation of sidewalk, we will need a highway occupancy permit for installation of the sidewalk. One thing I would like to clarify, though, is with regard to the sidewalk, for my client's sake, I don't believe you wish us to construct the sidewalk along the ramp. If I read you correctly, and if I look at the worn patterns out there, you're asking for us to construct it from our northern property line, but then out onto and continue along Route 9 south to where the crossings are at the traffic signal. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Thank you.
And then Ken, just for Mr. Pankey, just one more question. So I think the traffic analysis, it used what's in the ITE land use code designation as mini warehouse. Can you just describe what that is in terms of storage facility? And then have you done any analysis or looked at what other uses are permitted in the zone for this site, and what the proposed traffic for a mini warehouse self-storage would be compared to other permitted uses, office, retail, things of that nature?
Yes, certainly. So that would be
Carl, did you give him a copy of our notes? I mean, it sounds to me like Charlie's doing all of our notes here.
Yeah, it's pushing us to the next part of our testimony.
I think that if you would just take Charlie's lead and take us through those points, we'll come back and we'll come back. Go ahead.
Sure. So we did submit a traffic impact study with this application, which did inventory the roadways and some traffic volume data on the roadways, both pre-COVID and current COVID, and prepared some analysis. Probably the more important part of the traffic study is the discussion on the use. The property in question is in the HD1 zone, highway development zone. It is a piece of property that is zoned for offices, commercial institutional uses, some healthcare type uses, retail, strip retail, restaurants without drive-throughs, all highway-oriented development, all relatively high, potentially peak hour and daily traffic generators, all which would generate and face the same access constrictions on this property that was described a moment ago by Mr. Marinelli with regard to the inability to have access directly from Route 9 and really being limited in access to Sunnyside Road. So with regard to the traffic generation of a mini warehouse or self-storage, which is a synonymous term, there is substantial data that's published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers in the publication Trip Generation, which is in its 11th edition. And based upon that data, we're expecting roughly during the morning peak hour, that 7:30, 8:30 period, and the evening peak hour, the commuter hour, 4:45 to 5:45, maybe 7 vehicles tops enter and then exit this site over the course of a daily operational day, at 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. with the core office hours of 9:30 to 6, we would expect someplace between 40 to 60 vehicles arriving at this site and departing this site. A very low traffic generation. Actually, from a use variance standpoint, in reflecting on the traffic generation of the site, to put this property on the tax rolls, develop it commercially in accordance with the intents and purposes of the HD zone, I don't think you could identify a better use from a traffic standpoint. It's developing the property, bringing a commercial use onto Route 9, but really not generating any substantial traffic loads, particularly given the limitations in access to this property. So I think from that standpoint, it is an extremely well thought use for this particular property. The types of vehicles you see come into self-storage facilities are everything from passenger car, small vans, Sprinter vans, small box trucks rented by people, very infrequent utilization. I know this board has experience with self-storage. There's an operating self-storage 2 properties up from us, iStorage, and we actually observed that during the peak hours. During the peak hours that we observed that there was about 4 vehicles that went in and went out over the course of an hour, and that's an older self-storage type model. Those are those 1-story buildings. And then you've recently approved and now have seen the really light intensity use of the U-Haul facility to the north, state-of-the-art building, 3-story, and that actually has a retail component to it in the leasing of the U-Haul facilities. And I would suggest that the board probably has experienced that there isn't a substantial amount of traffic generation, even with that building being twice the size in terms of number of units and with the that retail component in it. So from that standpoint, I think, in my opinion, the use on this site as proposed really is a great way to bring this property into utility without having any substantial traffic impacts. Our driveway is located away from the traffic signal. It'll be low volume. It can have safe sight lines, safe geometry to accommodate the types of vehicles that will enter and exit. And certainly the nominal amount of vehicles entering and exiting will really have no impact on the operations of Sunnyside Road, and will be able to easily do so. I think that summarizes it and addresses the questions in the engineering report.
Carl, I have one more question, and then you're talking about 60 some feet of available access on Sunnyside Road. I think it's important for the board to hear your professional opinion that this is not a substandard or compromised access, that this is a safe access, and that the design that is being advanced adequately provides access to the site. I think the board should hear that from you.
Yeah, I think I testified to that. The 63 feet certainly provide us ample opportunity to provide the 25-foot wide access aisle and to provide the appropriate radius on the driveway approaches to safely move vehicles in and out of this site. So it's more than sufficient from that standpoint, particularly given the intensity of the movement of vehicles into and out of the site.
And with regard to that term mini warehouse, a term that's probably from 40 or 50 years ago, it got embedded in the DOT's rules and regulations. The rest of the world moved on to the word self-storage, but mini warehouse was embedded in those statutes. If you could just confirm that they are one and the same.
That's correct. The data published under that synonymous, the terminology mini warehouse and ITE is self-storage facilities.
Thank you. I have nothing further of Mr. Pankey, Mr. Chair. He's available to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Pape.
Thank you.
Any of the board members have any questions for the traffic engineer?
I do, Mr. Chair, if I may, real quick.
Mr. Hughes?
Just kind of a procedural thing here. I'm looking at some of the renderings and things like that on the screen. Now those two, I'd call it restricted drive, the north and the west the gated area where you have the roll-up doors. Is there going to be any restriction on like box trucks, either parallel parking or backing up to the doors? And I think if they back up, they would kind of block the drive aisle for emergency vehicles, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so the way the building's laid out functionally and will operate is that you basically have a parallel parking lane along the building. So you would pull up to your door parallel to the building, not blocking the aisle, and unload into your facilities. It's actually the same exact design that you have at the U-Haul facility up the road. And as I said, this is an industry standard. We don't design them and set them up to back into the doors. It's all parallel layout.
Okay, wonderful. I just wanted to make sure there was some kind of agreement on that. I think, cars and things like that could probably manage it, but a truck couldn't. All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah, and you as indicated, the facility is during daytime hours, does have managers on the site, so that is being watched. So if there's an issue, that is something that is quickly corrected by the management of the facility, and those off hours, the frequency of people on the site is extremely low. So,
So I would imagine that all the cameras on site probably have a viewing area so they can keep an eye on all around the building live, correct?
In the office.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Board members, any others?
Yeah, I just have one. If we could bring the screen down till we get to Sunnyside Road, if that's possible at the entrance. Okay, you have like a pickup truck with a long box trailer coming in, making a right off the ramp and getting into the entrance. Do you feel comfortable that truck can make that turn into the site if you have a car exiting at the same time?
Yes, yeah, they should easily be able to make that swing. The ramp is a bit of a distance away. There's probably about 40 feet between the ramp and a radius, so a box truck should be able to easily make that maneuver.
Okay, yeah, because I'm now looking at the screen a little bit more, and I can see that the ramp is a little further away. Just the tone of the picture, it almost seems like it's closer, but
yeah, it seems like it's closer, but it is actually a little bit away, and the ramp actually has a really little radius to it. So a truck or vehicle that's coming down the ramp is already well positioned as he makes his turn. He's not coming. It's not a 180-degree turn from that standpoint.
okay. And if a car is going to make the U-turn and actually go east on Sunnyside back towards Route 9 to make a left onto northbound Route 9, I'm quite sure then there will be two turns at the end of the ramp. So one would go west and the other would be allowed the traffic to go towards the east. Is that right?
Yeah, the existing ramp is striped with 2-lane approach.
Okay.
Separating the lefts from the rights.
Okay. And I think Matt asked the other question about the vehicles parallel parking. That was my other question, but that was taken care of. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mertens. I see what you're saying, Mr. Mertens. Perhaps maybe if there's not a yield sign there when you're coming off the ramp, there should be one, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, just for the record, I just quickly bopped down to Google Earth. There are yield signs on that ramp exit.
Okay.
Both sides.
Ken, would the applicant be amenable to looking into like a driveway ahead sign or something like that coming off the turn there? Obviously, it's probably subject to DOT because it's there right away, but.
Sure. Excellent idea. I would suggest that Mr. Pankey and you could work on what we would present to the DOT for their approval.
And then also kind of on the parallel parking note. So obviously the applicant, I think the fire official issued a memo about, fire lane striping and signage needed to be designed at the time of site plan. The applicant will comply with that.
Yes.
And then would the applicant have any issue with agreeing to Title 39 enforcement on the property?
No, Title 39 is going to be our request. And there's also some fire hydrant and FDC recommendations of Chief Lewis. We can put those on the record too. That will.
Okay. And then the last thing from a traffic/access perspective, I think On the northeasterly side of the property, there's an existing curb cut probably for whatever the prior use on the property was. Would the applicant be willing to abandon that curb cut?
Northeast, north,
Yeah, so.
yes, yeah.
Yep, right there.
goes
There's an
into the
existing
trees,
curb
yeah.
cut and an asphalt apron.
Sure.
Yeah, I think we would be removing that as part of the highway occupancy permit for the sidewalk, so that would become part of the highway occupancy permit to do that work.
Yes.
Kind of off topic of traffic real quick. This is, I assume this is city water and sewer, correct? For the fire sprinklers?
That's correct. I didn't go into detail with proposed utility, but there is electric, gas, water, and sewer all available in the Route 9 ramp,
Okay.
Route 9 and the ramp.
Thank you.
Okay. Any of the other board members?
Nope.
Okay. So,
Okay.
Jen? We haven't heard from you, Jen. Do you have
I
anything?
know, I've been very quiet tonight, but no, I have no questions for this witness.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I request 5, please?
I second that.
Okay, so the board's gonna take 10 minutes and then, and so we'll be back, Eileen, at 9:20, okay?
Okay.
Very fine.
Meeting will take a short break and reconvene at 9:20.
Okay, Mr. Pate,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I believe we're gonna go on to the next profession.
Very fine. We're all here?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, board members, the applicant, next witness is Stephen Radasti, the architect who's responsible for the design of the building. Mr. Radasti has testified before this board previously. He is under oath, but I'll ask that he share with you his credentials and confirm his license is in good order before testifying. Mr. Radasti.
Yes, I'm a licensed registered architect in the state of New Jersey. I graduated with a Bachelor of Architecture in 1992 from NGIT, and in 1996 I became a licensed architect. I'm a principal at Perez and Radasti Architects, and I have testified in front of this board, as well as dozens of other boards throughout the state of New Jersey.
Yes, you have, Mr. Radasti. We accept your credentials.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Radasti, I'm going to ask if we could give Mr. Radasti control of the screen, and Mr. Radasti, if you could bring up your perspective of the front building, the front of the building.
Okay, so I have here in front of me Exhibit A7. This is view number 3. And this is a view from Sunnyside. It's a south elevation. The proposed building is a 3-story structure that includes several different sizes of self-storage spaces. They vary from 5 feet by 5 feet up to 10 feet by 33.8 feet. The majority of the building is climate controlled. We designed the main entrance, the south elevation, so that it's a focal point. It is accentuated by a 3-story element in the extra space storage corporate colors. This element is broken down with a series of large windows that give views into the inside of the building. The main elevations include a series of triangular floor plan cutouts to add jogs and interest to the building elevation. These facades are clad in vertical metal panels in shades of gray, off-white, and accent green. The lower portion of the facade is clad in a faux brick veneer in order to add a horizontal element and to also act as a water table. By the front entrance, there would be an internally illuminated LED sign drawing attention to the entrance, spelling the words office. This sign is 11.5 inches high, but 3 foot 9 3/4 inches long, which is 3.6 square feet. It was also the reasons for these cutouts and the elevations to give some visual interest and some vertical elements. Not only are these jogs in the plan, but there are also jogs of several feet at the building parapet. And we did this to create interest at the top wall, as well as cut-ins in the facades. And we had this green to add to these vertical elements. At the northeast facade of the building, there'll be an internally illuminated LED building mounted sign that is 3 feet in height by 32 feet in length for 96 square feet. That's the extra space storage sign.
Steve, do your exhibits show this or?
I do have that on another exhibit. I could switch to the next. Exhibit.
I think let's pull that up for a moment, Steve.
Okay.
And as Steve is doing that, I will share with you the colors that are on the building are the national brand colors of extra space storage.
Okay, I have here view number 4, which is also part of the same exhibit, A7. And the sign that I was talking about is here. This is extra.
Steve, you didn't change your share.
I have to, okay. Sorry there. I'm going to stop sharing their individual files. So now I'm going to share the screen. Okay, I have here view number 4, which is also part of the same exhibit A7. So the sign that I was speaking of is here, where it says extra space storage. And this sign is 3 feet in height by 32 feet in length for a total of 96 square feet. The cutouts that I was speaking of are in the floor plans here and here, and they create these vertical elements that give jogs in the plan, as well as some visual interest by adding some of the accent color vertically, as well as more of these windows. And through the windows, you can see into the space, and you will see green colored overhead doors that allude that the building is a self-storage building. We have that same brick water table that extends throughout the entire building along the bottom course. So we have vertical elements as well as horizontal elements.
Steve, I'm going to jump in and ask you a couple of pointed questions.
Sure.
Mechanicals servicing the building, are they all roof mounted?
That is correct.
Are they all behind the parapet?
Yes, they will be.
Elevator or the overhead for the elevator, again, roof mounted?
Yes, the elevator shafts will be, they will not be visible beyond the roof parapet.
And the overall height of the building,
Is,
Steve?
40 feet.
40 feet is the total height of the building.
That is correct.
You've heard some testimony earlier by other witnesses that their security systems, is your building going to be designed to incorporate all of those security systems?
That is correct.
And you've heard our commitments that the fire chief's requirements with regard to FDC connections, you'll comply with the fire chief's request with regard to FDC connections.
Yes, I will.
And if you could, there's a third sign, if you could just take us around to where, so there is the one extra space storage identification sign. You showed us the letters over the door that have the word office. There's one more sign on the building that says the word loading. Can you bring that one up?
Yes, I can. Okay, I have here exhibit A13. This is sheet SK4 dated 5/16/22.
I think you're going to have to zoom in or we're not going to find that word.
Oh yes, I'm zooming in as we speak. So we have here. So this is the west side of the building, the left side, and we have here the 2 loading doors. Above the 2 loading doors, we have a green canopy to draw attention to it that's the common loading doors, and then we have the sign that says loading. That sign is 11.5 inches high by 5'10" and 5/8 long for a total of 5.6 square feet.
5.6 square feet for the word loading, 3.36 for the word office, and one sign just under 100 square feet. I didn't ask you, but I asked if you would. That sign is designed to be compliant with the ordinance's requirements for percentage of facade coverage. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So let me just get this straight.
Say that?
You're assuming that people that see these big garage doors aren't going to understand that that's where the loading is. So you need a sign that says loading, and you need a variance to put that sign up.
Well, there are multiple. I mean, what we have is some of these doors go directly into
I'm just
individual
saying,
units.
come on, let's be honest. You need a variance for the number of signs.
Yes.
This sign is unnecessary. People are not that stupid. They're just not. There's no need for that sign. And I have to tell you, you need a variance for the number of signs. So Ms. Cafone, good luck with that, because this is not a sign I'm going to support. There's no reason for a sign that says loading above garage doors that scream loading. It's unnecessary.
Ms. Beam, point well made. This sign is withdrawn.
Thank you.
And you overestimate the intelligence of people.
I really don't think I do. I mean, when you have loading doors,
I got your point. I'm just joking.
the scream is loading. And you don't, if they didn't need a variance, that's one thing. But to get a variance for a sign that says duh, it's just not necessary.
If we may, I think here's an important one, Mr. Radasti. Please confirm this building is fully fire suppressed with a sprinkler system throughout.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So it'll have the security system, it will have the sprinkler system. Please confirm that you're familiar with, that you've done more than one of these, that you're familiar with the construction codes that are applicable, and this building would be 100% compliant with the construction code requirements for self-storage.
Yes, I'm very familiar with self-storage buildings. I have designed several of them, and several are on the boards at this time. I'm very familiar with the International Building Code 2018, which is the current code in the state of New Jersey.
And one last topic. I know that early on, you presented a couple of versions of this building to Ms. Beam for her comment. I do know that there were two sides of the building where you didn't gain support from Ms. Beam and you redrafted the plans. If you could just describe the changes that were made, and then I'm going to really take a risk and ask Ms. Beam if she's satisfied with what you've done.
I mean, I'm going to save you the time. I am satisfied with the work that he's done.
Thank you for saving us with the time, Mr. Chair. I'm going to take that as an invitation to wrap up and to say that is Mr. Radasti's testimony with regard to the building design and its features. He is available to you.
Great. Mr. Radasti, I have a question.
Yes.
Where are the mechanicals for the HVAC in this building?
So the mechanicals would be mounted on the roof behind the various parapets that we have.
Okay. And so maintenance will be done on a regular basis, I take it?
Yes, maintenance for those units. They would have access. Maintenance people would have access through the roof, through the top level of the staircase. There would be an access panel and a 4x4 access panel where they could access the roof unit.
Okay. So we have that perspective. All right, snow removal and stuff like that. How do we do services on a site like this?
Would you like, we maybe bring back Mr. Pankey for the snow removal. You've got basin areas that are readily available for that snow removal, but that testimony should come from, I think, traffic. Mr. Pankey, comfortable addressing that point?
Yeah, I think you've hit it dead on. I mean, obviously there's a management company involved with landscape management and snow removal that maintains the property, and depending upon the extent of the storm, obviously the snow will either be pushed aside or into the basins. a more severe storm. If something needs to happen to have it removed to the site, of course, that would happen, but I think the frequency of that is pretty light.
Okay, so then Charlie, are we gonna fence the basins or, how are we gonna work this?
I mean, I would, I think the one basin has an access drive to it, but I mean, I would certainly recommend they be fenced, especially with sidewalks along the frontage and things like that. Maybe adjacent to the drive aisle, it could be, timber guide rail in lieu of fencing, so that way they could push it up against it. I think some safety feature needs to be provided around it, whether it be fence or guide rail. I wouldn't recommend there be nothing.
Yeah, and I think, we can explore that further. I think Mr. Marinelli's still on. He can explore that further if indeed we do proceed to site plan approval. I think we understand that concern and we can design for it.
We're very comfortable with those remarks.
Mr. Pate, we've gone from 30 to 20 feet, that adds the conundrum of, when we have a major snowstorm, how do people get to their stuff, right? So just throwing it out there.
No. Mr. Chair, one of the things that I wanted to point out that to give a sense of the intensity of the use and the availability of lands that are not being put into utility. The ordinance has a maximum impervious coverage of 70%. We're at only 52%. There's 48% of open space. And there's also looking for it so I read it correctly. We're very much under the building coverage too. I think that Mr. Marino, if you could help me with that, but my recollection is that we're less around half of what the building coverage permits. I only make that point here to demonstrate that there's plenty of green area around here where we can work out a push program, and we can stipulate that if the push program doesn't work, we will agree to remove it. We have to provide access to all of the tenants. There's no two ways.
So,
about it.
Mr. Say, to just answer your question, I think what you were getting at is, right, so they're asking for relief of the 30-foot circulation in certain areas of the site. I mean, could the applicant comply with that requirement by additionally making the building smaller and then have more pavement area for snow storage if you had a snowstorm that was significant? Yes, and obviously that goes to the use. So, it's from the board's perspective, do you feel that they put sufficient proof on the record that the deviation from the 30-foot standard, is acceptable? So could they comply? Yes. What would it mean? The building would have to get smaller. The basins are where they are. They're designed to what those standards are. That's the limiting factor, is the size of the building. So.
Got it.
So, and then just before we get done with Mr. Radasti, I just had a question about the lighting on the building. Is that just security lighting, or is that meant to be the lighting for the drive aisles?
The building mounted lighting is just small security lighting. It would be shining directly down. It would be LED lighting. It wouldn't cast out from the building, so it would just be directly down.
Yeah, so if the board rules favorably, when they come back for site plan, there will be separate pole mounted lighting with house side shields that's faced towards the building and not towards the residential properties, to the west and north.
Got it.
Okay.
All right, board members, anybody have a question for the architect?
No.
Good, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
just had a question with regards to all these bay doors. Are they all access to units directly, or do any of these doors service any part of the building for either maintenance or for some other type of use?
So the two doors that are located under the green awning, those are common loading doors that go into an interior vestibule. And next to that is a staircase, as well as the two elevators. So you could load directly into that, which would go up, into the elevators or stairs, and you could bring it to the floor that you would need. And there's also interior doors that go to the corners of the facility. The remainder of the overhead doors go directly into larger units that are on the first floor on the north and west sides of the building.
So the purpose of my question was, I'm guessing that the loading sign that was placed over those doors is to differentiate doors that access the building versus units that are accessed by the client who's renting them, correct?
Yes, that was the intent.
Thank you.
Board members?
I'm good, Mr. Chair, so far.
Okay. Jen, we haven't heard from you.
You have, I was not happy with the sign that was unnecessary. But I will say I have worked extensively with Mr. Radasti about the architecture, so I have no comments. I think he's listened to everything that I've said and has incorporated all my comments.
Very good. Mr. Pate?
Yes, Mr. Chair, board members, the final professional witness to testify this evening is Christine Cofone. Christine Cofone, a professional planner, always testifies last because all of the facts that have been shared with you by the first four witnesses are important important facts for her to utilize to draw her opinions. I'm going to ask if Ms. Cofone has been sworn. If we take just a few moments to place her credentials on the record before she begins her substantive presentation. Ms. Cofone.
Hi, good evening, everybody. For the record, Christine Mazzaro-Cofone. I'm a licensed professional planner. I've been practicing for about 27 years in the state of New Jersey as such. So during that 27 years, I've been qualified in Howell on many occasions and well in excess of 400 or so other planning and zoning boards throughout the state of New Jersey. I currently serve as an affordable housing special master in about 24 municipalities. I teach planning and zoning courses for the Rutgers Center for Government Services, where I'm an adjunct instructor, and I am the appointed planner for the Casino Redevelopment Authority in Atlantic City, and my licenses are current and valid.
We accept your credentials, Ms. Cofone. Now, with regards to this application, please be clear and so that the board members understand what it is that you're presenting to us.
I will do my best, Mr. Saya. So to be clear, the reason we're here before your board, the zoning board, is because the subject property is located in the HD1 highway development zoning district. While that is a very permissive commercial district, and when I say a permissive commercial district, it allows such uses as offices, financial institutions, healthcare and medical centers, hospitals, restaurants without a drive-through, restaurants with a drive-through, entertainment uses, retail services, tattoos and body piercings, indoor recreation, breweries, craft distilleries, assisted living facilities, and other similar type intensive commercial uses. What it doesn't allow is the self-storage facility that is proposed here. So as such, we need a D variance, a D1 use variance to allow a use that's not otherwise permitted in the HD1 zone. So with that comes the responsibility and burden of proof for our team to demonstrate, or for me as the planner, to demonstrate that this site is particularly suited for the proposed use. Now, it doesn't have to be uniquely suited. Our role is not to demonstrate that the only use that can go on this site is self-storage and that there's no other appropriate location. That's not the burden, and the particular suitability, while a somewhat elusive term, means there has to just be something unique or suitable at this property. Mr. Marinelli showed you a number of exhibits, A15, 16, and 17, that all showed you the odd configuration of the property, but more specifically that the site has to get its access from that irregular little cleat or foot piece of our property that's about 63 feet on Sunnyside Road. So that's where the site is getting its access. So when you listen to that litany of permitted uses in the HD1 zone, you can see how the subject property would certainly be more suited to a use, as Mr. Carl Penke, our traffic engineer, testified, was certainly less intensive from a traffic point of view than many of the other as of right uses in the zone. So for that reason, I submit to the board that the site is certainly particularly suitable. And to quote Mr. Penke, it really is about the best use you can get for this site, and I would certainly agree with that. In addition to particular suitability, we have to demonstrate that the positive criteria or special reasons exist for the grant of this variance. Statutorily, we only have to advance one or more of those purposes of the land use law. And those purposes are identified by letter and not number in the municipal land use law. They are certainly not unique to Howell. Ms. Beam and I did not come up with them in our 27 years of practicing. They're not our crafty lingo. They come right out of the statute and are identified by letter and not number. I believe the board can rely on 4 of them. Criteria G talks about a sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses. As you heard Mr. Marinelli testify earlier, we do meet all the underlying bulk criteria. And then as Mr. Pape just reminded the board in his statement, we are far below the permissible lot coverage in the zoning district. So there is certainly sufficient space and this is an appropriate location for the use. Criteria H talks about the free flow of traffic. Certainly this use is not one that is going to have any substantial detriments or degradation of the adjoining roadway system. So I think we can rely on criteria H. Criteria I, we worked extensively with Ms. Beam to come up with a building that was architecturally attractive and suitable and met with the architectural guidelines in your zoning ordinance. I think we've come a long way with the architecture on the project. So I think we rely on criteria I. And lastly, criteria M talks about coordination of public and private procedures and activities shaping land development with a view of lessening the cost of such development. And I think that criteria M is also appropriate here because criteria M specifically talks about an efficient use of the land. And when you look at the fact that one of the objectives specifically stated in the 2019 reexamination plan was to encourage the revitalization of vacant or underutilized properties, I think that this is an efficient way to do that, and it's consistent with the master plan. So again, that's the positive criteria. Statutorily, we can meet our burden of proof by advancing one, but I believe that those 4 criteria G, H, I, and M from section 40:55D-2 of the land use law are advanced by this application. That also leaves us with a burden of proof for the Medici reconciliation. And when we reconcile the omission of this use from the zone plan. I should have also mentioned in my particular suitability proofs the presence of this site on a jug handle, because that is an important consideration for this board when you're evaluating whether you think a self-storage facility is appropriate here. And perhaps one of the reasons this was reconciled or not permitted in the zone was that it is on a jug handle, and your ordinance is only, or will hopefully soon be amended to allow for self-storage facilities in certain zones where your ordinance is creating, or your master plan, your new master plan that you did in 2022, you just adopted, or your planning board did last month, recommended self-storage be a definition be created in the ordinance as a system whereby individuals rent containers or units of space within a large warehouse to store possessions, including outdoor storage of vehicles in the rear yard. So your master plan that was just adopted last month suggested adding that definition. And I think our use is certainly consistent with that, but I think the board can also consider that as the Medici reconciliation, is that this is something that your ordinances are really just now being looked at to define that type of use. So that's my opinion on the Medici reconciliation. That leaves us with a burden of proof with respect to the negative criteria. And the negative criteria does not ask you to hold us or any other applicant to a standard of debt that there be, to a standard of proof that there be no detriment, just that the benefits of the grant of the variance outweigh any detriment. And when you look at the fact that the HD1 zone does allow so many uses as of right that are commercial and intensive, and that we do have residences to our west and a residential zone across the streets to the south, and then across the highway, of course, we have the PMU mixed-use zoning district. I think this site, the storage on this site, makes an absolutely beautiful transitional use from those properties to our west to the Route 9 corridor, where you find the more intensive commercial development. And as far as the public good, you already heard the overture that we would certainly be willing to accept the restriction on tractor trailers, that we would accept a prohibition on outdoor storage of materials. So I think the board can be very comfortable that we have revised this plan to comply with the residential buffers and such that we will have no substantial detriment on the public good. As Ms. Beam indicated earlier, we do still need that buffer for the PMU plan mixed use residential zone across Route 9, which is a little bit peculiar. There's a bit of a quirk in the ordinance that we still have to request that, even though we're really, there's a divided highway or multiple lane highway intervening between us. But also when you look at that PMU zone where we are seeking that buffer across Route 9, it is a residential district, but it allows as of right for tens of thousands of commercial square footage right along the Route 9 corridor. So I think that that's a distinction with a difference when you're evaluating, is that buffer relief appropriate? So those are my thoughts with respect to the negative criteria and the impact on the zone plan and the impact of the public good. I think this is a situation where the burden of proof for the relief that we are seeking does not rise to a level of substantial detriment. We've also agreed to do the sidewalks as requested by Ms. Beam. So I think that you can be comfortable that we will have no substantial detriment to the zone plan or the public good, and recognizing that your newly adopted master plan does call for the creation of a definition of the term of self-storage that I just read into the record. That definition was read right from the master plan, and that the master plan does suggest expanding the districts in where self-storage facilities are located. So I think the board looked at this application as being consistent with that. As far as the other, I already touched on the buffer variance. I think we just needed some relief. Well, we agreed to get rid of the additional sign, and then we needed some bulk variance relief for the walls, the retaining walls. Mr. Cunliffe, I believe, made some suggestions for those, and I think the board can certainly grant the walls as a C2 variance where it's a better zoning alternative to have those fences and walls in the locations that they are to properly develop the site. So with that being said, I think unless there's something on direct, Mr. Pape, that I haven't addressed that you want me to go back over, I'm happy to do that.
Ms. Caphone, I think that you covered it all, but there are 3 points that I'm going to ask you to help me, you and me make with emphasis. One is the maximum impervious coverage. I made the statement, I'm just going to ask if you could similarly, as a planner, state, we are 52% in a 70% permitted zone. So our intensity of use measured by impervious is less than what the ordinance contemplated. Does that play into your decision to opine that this is an appropriate use on the site?
It does, and that's why I used, when I mentioned that you had stated that, I used that in criteria G of the land use law. When I was talking about the positive criteria, I brought that up specifically because criteria G talks about sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses. So that's why at that point, I reminded the board that we're far below the impervious coverage permissible in the district.
And in addition to a design of the building that Ms. Beam commented positively, we're in a zone that allows a 45-foot tall building. On this property could be a 45-foot tall building, and our building is 40 feet tall. Again, we're less than the ordinance. And how does that play into your conclusions about the appropriateness of this use?
Again, I think, even though our building is only 40 feet where 45 is allowed, I think it's a combination of the building is going to be less intensive than could otherwise be, but also the trips associated with it and the activity in it. I think it was testified earlier that our operations will cease by 10 o'clock at night. So this is not a use, in my opinion, that is going to have any type of negative impact to the area.
My last question, again, just for emphasis, both Mr. Pankey and you shared statements that the use that we propose is less intense, in fact, far less intense than those uses that you recited as are permitted. And how does that play into your conclusion?
It plays into that this is really just a better zoning alternative and functions, in my opinion, as a nice transitional use on a site that, let's face it, is a little bit challenging for some of those HD1 zone. That little irregular cleat of frontage on Sunnyside where we get our access, and the fact that we're almost entirely fronting, on that jug handle, it's going to be a tough site to develop. So when you balance the fact that the master plan wants to see the commercially zoned properties that are vacant, underutilized, that's been in the master plan for a number of years, I think the board can conclude, you know what, this is a pretty good use for about, like Mr. Pankey said, about the best use you can get for this site, and can be developed in such a way that some variance relief is required, but we certainly meet our statutory burden of proof for all the reasons offered.
I thank you. I have nothing further on directive Ms. Cofone. Mr. Chair, she is available to the board and the board's professionals.
You're on mute, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pape. Jen?
So I do not disagree with the testimony, with the exception of including criteria H, the free flow of traffic. I don't see how this promotes the free flow of traffic at all. So I would submit that I don't agree that that's a criteria that would be included in the statutory criteria for support of the use variance. However, the other three components, criteria G, criteria I, and criteria M, I do agree with. I do agree that the site's particularly suited for this type of use. And so I do feel like the site's particularly suited, meets the positive criteria, and I do think the testimony provided by all the professionals, summarized by Ms. Cofone, goes to the fact that the negative criteria has been met, that there's no substantial detriment to the surrounding land uses, and the intent and purpose of the zone plan and zoning ordinance have been met under the statute for this application. I feel like we spoke about the buffer relief that's requested, which is across Route 9 to Verdana, basically, which is, you know, hundreds of feet from their right of way, and then you have 100-foot right of way from Route 9. So I don't take exception to the relief being requested for that variance. I do still think there is, even with the elimination of that one sign, I do still think that there is variance relief required for signage under 256(5)(b)(3), which basically allows one of each kind of sign. And this, as of right now, are 2 wall signs. I take no exception at all to the 2 wall signs. I will say, if they come back, should the board act affirmatively for site plan with a pylon sign, that is going to need further relief, because you're really only allowed one of each. And so you've kind of gotten 2 wall signs, which requires relief. So that would require further discussion at that time.
Jen?
Yeah.
The sign on the northbound side, that's more than enough when it comes to, you know, do you need an extra pylon? I mean, it's large, right? It's
Right, so
100
they're
square feet.
not proposing a pylon at this time. I'm just suggesting, if they were to come back for site plan, if you were to grant them the use, a pylon sign, in addition to what they've asked for tonight, is going to require further relief, which is going to be a heavy lift, let's just say, right? Ms. Cofone talked about the relief that was required for the retaining walls in the front yard, because they're higher than 4 feet and they're not 50% open. And so, Mr. Pape, before I continue, there's a number of like waivers associated with like loading and like landscaping in the parking lot and whatnot. Is that something, should the board act affirmatively tonight, that you want to defer to site plan?
Yes, we would
Okay.
like to defer all of that to site plan.
So other than that, Mr. Chair, I take no exception to the testimony that's been provided.
Thank you. Charlie, any last words before we open it to public?
Yeah, the only comment / question, I think the applicant put testimony on the record that the units cannot be used for business purposes. So, you know, I think the largest unit on the first floor is 300 square feet, 10 by 30. So I just wanted the commitment. There's no like HVAC or plumbers or stuff like operating a business out of this facility, right? That's going to be restricted.
An HVAC contractor or plumber may store their materials here, but no business activity is permitted at all.
So they're not having an office associated with it, and we're not having, you know, 3 or 10 fleet vehicles coming into the site, picking up parts on a daily basis.
No, this would not be a flex building at all.
Okay,
Strictly a storage building.
that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cunliffe. Board members, any questions for the professionals? If we don't have any,
We are putting conditions on the size of the vehicles coming in. Is that correct? I believe we
That
addressed.
was already agreed upon, yes.
Yes, okay, just want to make sure. Okay, I'm good.
okay, so board members, if we don't have any further questions for the professionals, can I get a motion to open the public?
Motion to open a public, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Mr. Hughes, Mr. Orozco, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, seeing hands raised, everybody's good. Eileen, let's open it to public for questions and comments.
Meeting will now be open to the public. If you're calling in, you can press star 9 to raise or lower your hand and star 6 to mute and unmute yourself.
We can bring in Veronica Viviani first.
We're gonna bring in Veronica Viviani first.
Got it. There she is. Veronica, you can unmute and turn on.
We're
your-
here. Sorry.
Welcome. So,
How
Mr. Pitt,
How is everybody tonight after this very long meeting?
Oh, we're hanging in there. So,
Okay, so-
before you proceed with any questions or comment, we have to get you, Mr. Pape, our attorney, has to get your name and talk to you. Go ahead, Mr. Pape.
Okay, there's two people. There's Veronica Viviani,
Mr.
or
Bear.
Donnelly, and
Okay.
Tara Vasquez.
All right, Mr. Bear, you're gonna unmute.
How did he get here?
Ms. Viviani, and can you raise your right hand? Do you swear the testimony you'll give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Okay, so can you say your name and spell your last for the record?
My name is Veronica Viviani. It's Veronica. My last name is Viviani. Veronica Viviani.
And then
My
the second-
neighbor next
Yeah.
door is going to testify now. It's
And
Tara
what-
Tara Vasquez, first name Tara, Tara, last name Vasquez, Vazquez.
Okay.
Okay, can we get one at a time then?
Yes.
All right.
I'm going to start, Tara Vasquez. So when you guys started showing all your photographs of the area, you neglected to show the section across the street of Sunnyside where Sherrybrook is, where our homes are. We got the letters that show that we're 200 feet from the establishment going to be built. So you focused on the one home to the left of the facility or the west side of the facility, but nothing on the other side of the street. And there's a whole neighborhood. So my question is, how can you build a 3-story structure in a 2-story neighborhood? Everything in the area is 2 stories and it wouldn't be congruent to the rest of the neighborhood.
If I may, on behalf of the applicant, the zone expressly permits 45-foot tall buildings. And the building that we're adjacent to is the same size.
Well, according to the paperwork I got, I don't think the zoning was correct, but my question also is, and I'm going to say with the utmost respect to the board members, would you want a 3-story building with all that lighting shining in and over and seeing in your backyard while you're in your pool with your family or hanging out in your yard with this huge structure on the corner of Route 9?
It is consistent with the zone, and the lighting is all down at the ground level, as was testified earlier by Mr. Radasti.
You just showed us pictures of all the lighting for the loading on the bays.
Correct.
So I'm just going to interject. So you do realize that the site is in the HD1 zone, correct? So while yes, this is a non-conforming use, there could be a 7-Eleven that's operating 24 hours a day, that's 45 feet tall with lights that go 24 hours a day. So while yes, it's 3 stories, it's still below the height that's allowed in the zone. And the lighting is only on the buildings.
Well,
So I understand your concern, but at the end of the day, it's a HD1 zone site. It's not a residentially zoned site.
Okay.
Okay, but you did talk about sidewalks and,
I'm sorry, this is Miss Vasquez now, so.
No, that's
sorry,
I
this is Veronica.
Oh, Miss
Viviani.
Viviani, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I just, whoever,
So I've been here 18 years and I'm concerned because of the value of my home. Obviously, as any residential person would be, owner would be, but for a facility to be at 7:30 a.m. to, or 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. or sorry, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and to have 40 to 60 vehicles coming through right across the street from me, that's a major concern for us.
And while I understand that, and I don't mean to speak for the applicant, but there could be a fast food with drive-through, like a McDonald's that's open 24 hours a day. That's gonna have way more than 40 vehicles, and that's.
But that's a very small piece
It's
of
still a
property.
permitted use that can go on that site. A Taco Bell can go there. And that could be 24 hours a day.
Okay, but can we go back to the environmental use of the land?
I mean, I don't understand what you're.
Hold on a second.
Like, let's just address one thing at a time.
Yeah, before you go environmental.
Hold on. Your concern was 40 vehicles per day. A permitted use as a McDonald's would be way more than 40 vehicles per day. And it's
McDonald's is only 2 stories, not 3.
So are you concerned about the height or are you concerned about the number of cars?
I'm concerned about both.
Because they're allowed to be 45 feet tall. So it could be 45 feet tall with cars in and out 24 hours a day.
Can we also address the issue that we have, like within a 3-mile radius, we have at least 4 to 5 storage units?
So, but you're jumping. So what is the concern? Is it the height? Is it the number of cars? Is it?
It's all of it. It's all of it.
So let's
Like,
start.
for an example, can I just say something? For example, you have we have the ramp that comes down, which is in all the pictures. The entrance to the building is literally right next door to that ramp. We live here. We know how the people fly off the ramp. They don't even yield for the yield sign. It's going to be a huge mess with traffic. You got your entrance to the building is literally a stone's throw from where the ramp comes down.
Understand.
So,
and what I'm saying is that a permitted use that has way more than 40 vehicles anticipated per day would still have the same issue and be a more intense use of that site.
40 to 60 vehicles per day.
Per day. That's like 2 vehicles an hour. That's like literally nothing. So I'm just
not when you live right off Route 9. Not when you're adding 40 to 60 vehicles on top of all of the other traffic that is coming off of that
I'm going to
ramp.
just let you make your comments and I'm going to be done commenting.
That's just adding. I'm just saying that that's just adding 40 to 60 vehicles coming off of that ramp. That's right around the corner from our homes. And there's many more vehicles coming off that ramp every day. So now we're adding how many more vehicles? I mean, it's a lot. Would you want that right next to your home?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it's a lot, but you and I are going to agree to disagree.
Okay, well, we can agree to disagree, but we just, I mean, you talked earlier about there like a no access line and a frontage line and a drainage permit, and you talked about sidewalks, and we talked about a lot of things, and we've been on all night, and I'm just trying to understand this because I've been here for 18 years, and my tax rates keep going up and up and up. I just put a pool in this year, and now I'm going to sit in my backyard and I'm going to look at a 3-story facility that's across the street from me. Would you want that for you?
Honestly, the site is zoned HD1. So if you live across the street from an HD1 zone that allows a 45-foot tall.
I've lived
building,
across an HD1 zone for 18 years.
I get it. And unfortunately, the site hasn't been developed until this proposal. But at the end of the day.
Okay, but now down the road.
Excuse me, you asked me a question, so I'm trying to answer it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So at the end of the day, you're living across the street from a zone that allows a 45-foot tall building. So they're 40 feet. They're not even exacerbating what's allowed in the zone. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like the site is zoned HD1. So you need to compare what they're proposing to what could be allowed there per zoning. It's not a residential zone. You're not going to get a house there and it's not going to stay trees.
But on the other side of the old age home, that's on the other side of that property, there's another facility.
That's a different question. That's a different question.
They're popping up all over.
That's
How many do we need in Howell?
That's a totally legitimate question, which I'll pass off to the applicant. That's a different question. But saying that 40 feet is not okay, the zone allows for 45. So that is an issue that you're gonna have to come to terms with, because a permitted use, a more intense permitted use could go there, generating far more traffic and a higher building operating 24 hours a day, permitted.
Understood.
So if your concern is, do we need another one of that? That's a totally legitimate question, which I'm gonna put off to the applicant. But other than that, you need to understand what the zone allows for, which is a 45-foot tall building, which could generate a significantly higher generation of traffic 24 hours a day.
Can you
40 cars through 24 hours is nothing.
Can you explain to me a little bit more about what you were talking about the sidewalk?
So as you know, New Jersey Transit stops along Route 9, right? The bus stops.
Yeah, I took it.
And people
my whole
walk,
career.
right? And people walk along Route 9, whether there's sidewalk or not, right?
Right.
So what we've done is every applicant that's come in on Route 9, we have required them from our board to put in the sidewalk. So hopefully at some point, a continuous sidewalk along Route 9 will be provided. That's what that's about.
Okay. Because my daughter, is 26 and is a tenured teacher in Edison now, and she worked at the old age home, and she walked along that ramp.
Right.
And it was dangerous for her to walk along that ramp. And now I'm wondering, is this going to make this more dangerous?
My professional opinion is the answer is no. And if they were put the sidewalk in along Route 9, there'll be a continuous sidewalk to the bus stop, which is, I think, on the other side of Sunnyside, closer to the Lukoil, right? It's on the other side.
Is there any way that we can find out a way for this to not be 3 stories? That, like, I'm here 18 years. I've planted trees to try to block out Route 9 from my home. And now this massive building is going to just be in our view.
I'm going to defer that to the applicant. Okay. So Mr. Pape, I would suggest you jump in.
Yeah, the height of the building, as has been stated on the record a number of times, including by Ms. Beam, the height of the building does not require variance relief. It's for that reason that we offered a 40-foot building. And as far as the use of the building and the fact that there is another one on the highway, you heard earlier that we went to a consultant. We asked that the consultant analyze this site to determine that it was suitable and that it was needed. And you heard Mr. Lubeck an hour or so, 2 hours or so ago, indicate that they did a study that indicated that there's a continuing need for these, and this site would be a success. we're very comfortable with that analysis, and it's for that reason that we're asking for this use on the highway with a high comfort level that it will be a success.
But how do we determine that another storage facility is needed within this mile?
That's not a burden that's on this applicant. It's not a burden. I mean, we do not need to demonstrate that this is needed. We demonstrate that we, as Ms. Caffone indicated, there are a number of standards that we have to meet. She went through all of them, and she demonstrated that we have met them. But demonstrating that, I mean, McDonald's isn't precluded because Burger King's on the highway, and Chevy's not precluded because Ford's on the highway. We don't count the other uses that are there.
Right, but isn't there, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but isn't
Well,
there
you are.
supposed to be, isn't there supposed to be with Burger King and all those guys? They have a certain amount of distance that they can't put another one up before the other one.
No, you can put one right
That
next
is
to it.
that's not true.
You could just line them up. And you could, that's not the way
So is that what we want our town to be?
we hope that this well-designed building and well-designed use that fits on this site is something that the town will look forward to having at the site.
With the storage facility 2 doors down, and they just put one up over across by Twin Pond on the other side of Wawa, a
There's
little
a
bit down the
huge
road?
U-Haul on the side of Twin Ponds. And then next to two lots over past the old age community, there's another facility. How many storage facilities are we gonna put up in our area?
It's not a question that the applicant needs to answer. It's not a question that the board needs to investigate.
I'm not asking for that answer. I'm just proposing that this is not necessary. This is not, it's not adding any value to our community as stakeholders here paying $12,000-13,000 a year in property taxes to live on a half an acre of property. We've invested our lives to live here, and we've invested permits and pools, and we want to live here, but we don't want to see a big building off the side of our road. It's just not acceptable. And then our taxes are going to be raised because we decided to put in a pool this year. So our taxes are going to be raised to $15,000 a year, and we're paying to live on this property, but we have to come off of a ramp and have a 3-story building in our community that we've lived in for years. It's not adding up to us.
But Mr. Chairman, am I allowed to address the neighbor?
No, Glenn, you know what? The neighbor is asking, a very, heartfelt question. It's an HD1 zone. Other things can go in the HD1 zone. This is a low intensity use. We know that White Street cuts into Sunnyside Road, right? And Sunnyside has its own little jug handle, and it becomes a collector road. And a lot of people try to use it to cut across to get over to the other side of Jackson and stuff like that. In this case, people are not, you're going to be going to enter the storage facility so that they can cut through Sunnyside Road, et cetera. It's
Right.
not adding additional traffic per se into the neighborhood. It's in and out for the most part.
But what is the lighting going to be? What is the lighting going to be when you say that it's going to be open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m.?
It's going to be shielded lighting. It'll be pointing down.
In
and it will-
fact, whoa, this is not the site plan. This is the use. They're gonna have to come
Yes.
back for site plan where all of those issues will be vetted out. This is just the use. This is not the site plan.
And they will have to-
We have major concerns because this is our home. Like I said, I've been here for 18 years. We have major concerns about this going up. I have neighbors across the street that have a 3-week-old baby that were not able to be on this call today. And this butts up against their property line. And I talked to them today. They have major concerns, but they were unable to be on this call because they have a 3-week-old baby. And they just bought this house. And now this facility is going to devalue the home that they just bought.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, property values.
Yes,
are-
Mr. Mayor.
if I may, with all due respect to the residents, these are the issues before the board are land use questions, and the idea of property value, impact on property values is not a zoning board question. It's really a question of use and land use principles. And I guess if the residents have any other points they haven't made, because it's becoming a little repetitive.
All right, so it is becoming repetitive. So how do we address that at a later date?
Well, as I think has been pointed out, right now, the issue is whether or not it's the board's, the issue for the board tonight is whether it's going to grant a use variance. A lot of the points you're talking about. And if there's enough votes to get a use variance, the issue before the applicant would come back to the board for a site plan application where traffic, lighting, all the kinds of things you're talking about would have to be.
What about construction as well?
Well, that's
Along the
regulate, again,
construction
that's not a zoning board question. Construction is an issue that's regulated by, the township has regulations concerning, that sort of activity.
Okay. So I got a question. Can I ask a question? Because this is all new to me. It's very, very, very frustrating. And so we listened to this very long meeting. You can't help us with anything because we got to go to a different board for it, correct? Am I correct by saying that?
No.
We have to go to a different committee. We have to listen to
No.
another meeting with another
Not
committee.
saying that.
Because if you guys approve it tonight, then what say do we have at that point anyway? It
Well,
moves
again,
on to its next committee.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Well, if,
Is
like
there-
you're saying, the last 3 things were, well, you have to go to this committee and then you have to go to
Well,
this
you're
committee.
right. No, what I was saying is that if this board grants a use variance, then the applicant has to come back before this board for a site plan approval. And so all those issues which would have to be noticed, and you'll have your ability to comment at that point on those questions. Construction, if there's an approval of use variance, if there's approval of site plan, then if there's any regulations concerning construction would be at the township level, the community development department within the township. That's all I'm saying is construction questions are not a zoning board question.
Can I ask one more question? I don't know if you're all everybody on the board are all residents in the town. Is that a requirement?
Yes.
They are.
Okay. So what value does putting this in bring to Howell? If I want your opinions, you're the board. You're the
I'm
You know
gonna
what,
say-
we can't offer you the opinion, because, it is what it is. It's land use. The applicant comes forward with a application. It gets vetted according to state statutes, laws, municipal land use laws, etc. It's in an HD1 zone. You could only surmise, that the it's a tax rateable. So hopefully that adds to the township's coffers. But that is not a reason to deny or approve anything.
Okay, so we just want to know where we stand because we've been on since 6:30 tonight, and I want to know, where do we stand with appealing this? Or is
Veronica?
there a decision being made tonight?
Veronica,
Because you're
there's
voting,
gonna-
I'm
there's
just,
gonna be-
I don't
there's gonna be-
understand the process.
Veronica, there's going to be a vote on the land use after we close it to public.
And when will
Should
that
that,
be?
should that move forward, then there'll be the applicant coming back for land development construction, to which time we could
Site plan,
address
Site plan.
site plan, you know, we could address all of the other issues relative to lighting, signage, traffic, etc. But right now, on a preliminary, you've heard the testimony of the professionals. You know, there's nothing that stands out there that, you know, is a detriment to it being an HD1 zone that I could see.
Not your backyard, though.
You know, I've watched many applications along the Route 9 corridor come, and it has affected everyone who butts up against it, whether it's the Quick Check on 9, whether it's the Kohl's, the ShopRite, the whole, everything down, you know, it just, HD1, you have to be aware when you move into a location, if you're butting up against HD1, it's commercial development, and it's going to be commercially developed at some time. It's problematic for those who are, you know, don't understand that they're close to commercial property.
I understand that. I live behind a Luke Oil gas station. So I'm well aware of that.
Okay.
Any,
I have a 50-foot easement that I can't touch because it's behind a Luke Oil gas station.
It's an environmental.
So
Absolutely.
I get it. I
Mr.
get it. I've been here for a long time. I just want what's best for our town. And I don't want this to be decided on tonight. I want
So,
to make
Mr.
sure
Chair, I'm
that
just gonna jump in.
Yeah.
We've heard this, we've gone round and round and round. There's other people with their hands up that have been waiting. I think at this point, we understand the perspective and it's time to move on.
Thank you for listening to us.
You're welcome.
Be Laser Phillipson.
The next is Laser Phillipson.
We lost Laser.
No, he's here.
He's here.
We got him?
He's just on mute.
Oh, there he goes.
And he's gone.
Oh, Laser.
So Eileen, like those that are finished should get put back into the audience.
Yeah. I don't have it. Yeah, it's fine. Fred Gazier.
Next is Fred Gazier.
Laser Phillipson is
Laser, Eileen, I think I see him on my screen, but not his photo yet. Not his video. There, he's Fred.
and there's Fred.
There's Fred.
Fred, please turn
There
on
I
your
am.
video.
All right, hello, everybody.
Hey, there you go. Okay. All right, Mr. Bear, Mr. Fred Gazer.
yes, Mr. Gazier, before you go on, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, the witness is sworn, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
All right, I'd just like to make a few observations. I have a couple of questions and maybe a suggestion or two. But I have to feel for those two people who spoke before me. I live probably about a mile from them down Sunnyside. And the people in this area are very sensitive to things. Since we've had Verdana built, we've had the West Farms project built. And as Mr. Pape will know, because he represented the Fort Plains project. So anything that's going in that area right now is very sensitive. All right, specifically, I have a couple questions. I like this type of facility but I don't particularly like this one where it is. And the issue that I have with it is with the ingress and egress of the traffic going in and out of there. Couple of things about that. There was talk and testimony about the size of vehicles that will be allowed in and out of that. How are you going to control that? That would be the first question I would have.
That was addressed earlier by Mr. Pankey and in response to questions from Mr. Cunliffe through signage.
Yeah, it wasn't, that's not adequate.
So
That's your opinion.
Can Mr.
Nope.
Pankey answer the question?
No, he did not. So I'd like to know.
He's
how
going
are
to
you
answer the
going to
question,
keep-
Mr. Gasia.
Pardon me?
Mr. Pankey is there. Mr. Pankey, please.
Yes, good evening. Yeah, to answer the question, as I testified to, the first control is the nature of the use itself. The types of vehicles attracted to this type of facility that would be in storage are basically people's automobiles, vans, small box trucks, rental trucks. Those are the types of vehicles that enter this type of facility based on its nature. So there's really not a lot of positive control that's required. It's not going to attract tractor trailers. What we agreed to is we'll reinforce that with regulatory signage indicating that tractor trailers aren't permitted in the site. But bottom line is the nature of this particular use, and the storage facility would not even attract that type of a tenant with a tractor trailer. They before they lease the site, they would know that they can't bring a tractor trailer into the site.
As a traffic expert, what size vehicle would you say would be too big to go in there?
Well, we actually tested the fairly large vehicle, which is a fire truck, which is similar to a single unit 40, which is the largest box truck out there. So largest box truck, fire engine, a car pulling or a SUV pulling a rental trailer. Those types of vehicles can all easily circulate this site.
Well, so we know that a fire truck is approximately 40 feet long. Would you suggest that any vehicle over 2 tons would be too big to go in there?
2 tons is very light. You wouldn't do it by weight restriction. It's really the length of the vehicle. An articulated tractor trailer couldn't circulate this site. And again, somebody that was intending to rent the unit here would know that they would not be able to bring a tractor trailer on the site, so they wouldn't even be renting a unit at this site. It's self-controlling.
Well, I would suggest to the zoning board in relation with the land use that you put signage on Sunnyside restricting the size of the vehicles on both sides. That would stop that.
Did we not agree to that?
No, you did not. You did not. You agreed to have signs in the facility, but put them on the road, because that would be, that would stop it. Put a sign at the end of the ramp and also put a sign on the other side of Sunnyside, just like you have on Howell Road, limiting the size of the vehicle that would go on that road. And
Mr.
that would stop it.
Mr. Say, just to chime in, so the governing body, the municipality, is the only entity that has the ability to enforce signage in the public right of way. What we as a board, we can dictate what the applicant does on their site and what they put on their site and stipulate certain conditions. But as far as signage that regulates the public traffic way, that's stuff that has to be, if it's a town's right of way, it would come from the governing body. As far as DOT, it would come from DOT.
Right, if we have to make the applicant would have to make the application to DOT for that type of signage on the state.
Well, I would suggest the applicant do that then. That's my suggestion. Also, I travel through there quite often. I'm quite familiar with that ramp. That ramp is quite close to the entrance and exit for that, and traffic does often back up past where that ramp exits. Has this body, our zoning board, have you done your own independent traffic study on that as far as the safety for the ingress and egress?
We don't do that. We review what they submit.
Well, I suggest you do that.
We don't do that. That's not a role of the zoning board to do their own independent studies. We take an application, we review the application, we provide our professional opinion and comment. We don't do our own independent studies. That's not what we do.
So you just take whatever the applicant's expert said and you agree with that?
No, I didn't say we agree with it. I say we review it. We review it and we provide our own professional opinion on what they've submitted, but we do not do our own independent studies. That is not our role. That's not what we do.
Okay, well, whose role would that be then? Because you know what I used to do for a living, Jen?
I don't.
Okay, I spent 25 years in the state police. I worked with a lot of experts, and I'm not going to diminish the expert in any way, but I've never run into an expert that gave a detrimental report to somebody who paid them.
So I understand where you're coming from, but understand that we are not, that is not our job, is to do our own individual analysis. The site is zoned what it's zoned. They're asking for a use variance. They provided their own expert reports. We've reviewed them. We've given our opinion, and I can assure you, and you could ask Mr. Pape's opinion, I don't always agree at all and come back hard in times when I'm not in agreement with what they say, as is Charlie. And so we don't just unilaterally agree with whatever they submit, but it's not our job to do an independent report. That's not our role.
So now I'm going to ask you right now, then you agree that that report that was submitted by the traffic expert, it indicated that there is no safety or traffic issue with the ingress and egress to that property? Because that would end my question if you said yes, you agree.
I don't necessarily disagree. However, Charlie also has reviewed it, as has his traffic expert. So I would defer that comment to him because that's really kind of his lane, not my lane.
Charlie?
So, and to add on to that, so and I'll let Mr. Pankey, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering the traffic report correctly, the level of service for their site driveway was a level of service A, if I'm not mistaken. And as far as the proximity of the entrance to the off-ramp, they're going to have to get a highway occupancy permit from DOT. So they would also typically review the site as part of their permit application. At the end of the day, if that frontage on Sunnyside Road doesn't have an access restriction from DOT, I don't know that we can prohibit a lawful access on that frontage for a commercially zoned property in the HD1. It's just a matter of what's the level of traffic that's being generated from this use to that driveway. So I think you've heard, other permitted uses in the zone, retail, office, fast food. I think the board, as part of their consideration of the application, needs to consider the traffic impact from all those other types of uses, which are permitted by what's permitted in the HD1 zone, how much more of an impact those may have from a site access perspective and a traffic perspective compared to what's proposed, with self-storage.
Yeah, these places typically don't generate a lot of traffic. My concern is what is going to go in and out of there. I mean, we're going to let a moving truck in there? People move. That's where they keep the storage at. That's why I'd like to see signs on that road limiting the size of the vehicles that are going to be going in and out of there. Just a sign on that property isn't going to get anything done. But if you put them on Sunnyside Road on both sides, now you're going to have something. Like I say, this is only my suggestion. You can.
Mr. Gager, that's certainly a valid point, but I think going back to it, as far as from the board's jurisdiction, we can only dictate as far as what the applicant puts on their site as signage. That would be, we could certainly ask them petition the governing body to put signage on Sunnyside Road, but the board can't, physically require them to put the signage up because it's a public right of way. We can make them do it on their site, but the right of way is the township's jurisdiction as far as signage.
No, Charles, when you say the governing body, you're referring to the town council?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So they're the ones that impose weight limit restrictions on roads. If it's a municipal roadway, if it's a state roadway, obviously it would go to DOT.
Okay, I'm just, that's all I really wanted to get clear. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Fred.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Mr. Chair, I just want to ask Mr. Penke, and just to confirm, was that service level A?
Who else do we have?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And it comes back to the real purpose of this application. The only access to this property for any use on this site is at this location. And the use that's proposed is providing for a level of traffic that is so low that you can develop a very safe and efficient operating driveway for a facility of this type.
Okay. I didn't catch the service level earlier. I just wanted to confirm it. Thank you.
And just another question there. The signs that he asked for, can they be put at the entrance to the driveway? That is part of their property, is it not?
Any signage, regulatory signage by this board would be on the property. Any kind of weight restriction signage on Sunnyside Road or vehicle restriction is a governing body decision, but it's not purely a governing body decision. It has to reflect an engineering issue. And I would suggest to the board that this entire residential neighborhood to the west of us is taking all sorts of box trucks, delivery trucks associated with normal day-to-day deliveries to and from people's homes. So you're really not going to restrict the class of trucks that would be already common to these roads. That'll be common to this facility.
Thank you. Great point.
Eileen, we have another Jess Amato.
Yes, next is Jess Amato.
Hello.
Hi, Jess. Mr. Andy Bear is going to swear you in. Go ahead, sir.
Ms. Amato, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Ms. Amato is sworn in, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions and comments for our professionals, please.
Yes, I'm the mom of the 3-week-old that was mentioned earlier, so this is past my bedtime. But we are the home that is directly next to the lot in question. And after hearing all of this, I just wanted to clarify a little bit on what it's going to look like, the barrier in between our property and the property where the lot is being proposed for the storage unit. As mentioned earlier, there are not as many trees and things in between. We bought this house a little less than 2 years ago as is. We didn't remove anything. So when we bought the house, it came that way. So I just wanted to hear more about what that barrier would look like in terms of privacy and just separating the two lots, because as of now, it truly is just kind of in our backyard.
Mr. Marinelli, would you return to your exhibit, the A
16 can probably.
16, yes. And I'm going to, the area that we're focusing on to respond to Ms. Amato is the green area between the proposed building and what appears to be a wooded lot, which we are earlier indicated had been substantially cleared. It's a lawn area. What is proposed in the green area on our client's property?
So currently we're proposing to maintain the 50-foot buffer with no disturbance. So any existing trees that are there in that area between the proposed development and the property line would remain. The homeowner or the house is approximately 120 feet away from the property line. And then as you can see, our building is set back approximately 80 feet off of the property line. So perpendicular distance, it's roughly 200 feet. It's 240 feet actually from corner to corner on that from proposed structure to existing home. Now, what we would do in that area, to answer the question, is, as we stated, there will be a security fence that runs along the northern edge of that western edge of development. We would be supplementing the existing deciduous trees to remain with additional landscaping. If I could refer to, I believe this one was A15, where we cut the building back by 5 feet. We were able to provide a row of low-lying evergreen trees that would help buffer, supplement that buffer with year-round greenery.
If I may, Mr. Marinelli, earlier on, I heard Ms. Spiro state that that area will need to be improved. So in addition to what you're describing, I think we should share with the board and the public. We know that we have to satisfy Ms. Spiro and this board at site plan, and we know that we will be doing infill planting throughout that area. So in addition to saving the trees, you'll be doing infill planting.
That's accurate. And what we intend to do as part of our site plan application, should this application be acted on favorably this evening, is to go out and do an actual tree inventory, see what's there, what needs to be supplemented, and provide an adequate supplemental plantings in order to improve that existing 50-foot buffer.
Before you go on, Eileen, if you can, there should only be one panelist in at a time in terms of public participation. So that if you could make sure that's the case. So just Ms. Amato should be in from the public right now.
And that answers my question. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Well, you know,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, wait a second. So, Mr. Pate,
Yes.
you know, we put up there, you know, the buffer, the 50-foot buffer, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And when we look at it, where the house is and so forth, would we be willing to put up on the entranceway as it gets to the 120-foot distance, at least a fence, a solid white fence to block off the traffic that would be in Ms. Amato's viewpoint?
If Mr. Marinelli could restore the screen, just so I can make absolutely certain that I understand the question, I think this one's going to be an easy one to answer. Mr. Chair, I think that you're talking about where there is that angle.
That's what I'm talking about.
We,
you know,
absolutely.
even that and maybe even 20 or 50 feet back. So at least there's some protection for that household right there.
Similar, I would just note that similar to the fencing that would be required along the retaining walls, per Mr. Cunliffe's comments, that would also generate a design waiver requirement approval.
I would say the same thing, Mr. Chair. I think it's an excellent idea. In order to implement it,
That could be considered, yeah.
in order to implement it, we'll need to ask this board for some waiver relief, and we'll be prepared to include it and ask for that relief when we return, if the board allows us to move forward.
Ms. Amato?
That would be great. Thank you for advocating for us. I would appreciate that.
You got it. Ms. Amato, do you have any other questions?
I think that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Eileen, do we have anybody else in public?
No, no one else in public is raising their hand.
Okay. So, you know, members of the board, it's getting late. You know, can we have a motion to close the public, please?
Motion to close the public.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. All right, before Mr. Pate gives us his summation and so forth. You know, there's a couple of things that have come from the residents, right? And one has to do with the signage. Charlie, it's possible to fix the signage to limit the types of trucks that come into the site, yay or nay?
On the site, yes, they can certainly post signs at the entrance on the applicant's property restricting tractor trailers not to enter the site. But as far as, like I said, Sunnyside Road, that would be a municipal jurisdiction thing.
And so, Mr. Aguirre,
Yes, Mr. Saya.
would you advocate for that with the municipality to get those signs up for us?
I would just be advised. I mean, you put speed signs up and people still speed. You put you put lights up and people still run red lights. I mean, I believe, if it's something that the board so wishes, definitely would advocate on property or even on Sunnyside, whether it's going to control the actual movement of that type of traffic into the neighborhood remains to be seen.
But it's a resident's request, so that's what we're asking.
I have no issues with that.
Thank you. The other thing is then, of course, Jen, the access into and egress from the property, a solid fence to protect Miss Amato from, the distance.
I don't have a problem with the solid fence, and I don't have a problem with relief associated with that, as long as the fence is out of the site triangle. Because the site triangle would create a dangerous condition coming in and out. So as long as the fence does not obstruct the site triangle at the driveway, I do not have an issue whatsoever with a solid fence at that location. I don't even have a problem with a 6-foot-high solid fence at that location, which would protect the neighbor, as long as it's back far enough that it's not in the site triangle.
Very good. Charlie, that's possible?
Yes, and I just want to go back to the signage, Mr. Chair, not to beat it to death. So one thing that the board can require or ask the applicant to do as far as their site exit, you could ask them to restrict turning movements coming out of their site. So if you were so inclined to say, only passenger vehicles making a right out of the site onto Sunnyside Road, anything larger than that, making a left onto Sunnyside to go to Route 9, that's something that's within your right to require them to do that. That might help alleviate some of the concern with, box trucks and larger vehicles coming out of the site, going into down Sunnyside Road past the residential. Having said that, there's nothing to stop a box truck from coming from the west Sunnyside Road and coming into the site. Like I said, it's a municipal right of way, but as far as the site exit, I think that's not an unreasonable ask for the board to consider,
Like
for the applicant.
Right, Charlie, like when you're coming out of the Wawa onto Kent Road, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Mr. Pape, you copying?
I am. I would ask that.
Mr. Bear, you're copying?
I'm copying, Mr. Chairman. That's what I'm writing, but we need to know Mr. Pape's position on the signage, on the cars, trucks, right, left.
I'm going to ask Mr. Penke to comment whether a restriction on truck movements out of this site is something that can be accommodated, or is it something that should be further investigated before it's agreed to?
It can be a recommendation of this board, and we can agree to include it, but there does need to be, since the road is under the jurisdiction of the township, there would need to be a ordinance adopted by council for it to be able to be regulated under Title 39. But since it is a private site driveway, we could agree to install such a signage, but it can't be it can't be enforced unless the governing body adopts a resolution.
We would agree to include it in our plan, and if directed, we would agree to make the necessary Title 39 application to the governing body.
And Ken, you would support, you wouldn't oppose that before the governing body when that came up for their consideration?
No, there'd be no objection to it Title 39 enforcement is very valuable to all of us.
I think that's covered, Mr. Chairman, at that point.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. Board members, did we leave anything on the table? Not hearing any. Mr. Pate, closing.
Sure, Mr. Chair, I'm going to be very brief, respecting the detail of examination that the board members have already done of the witnesses and the hour. I think that you've heard from all of the professionals about how carefully this application was crafted. I think that all of the professionals, it appears the professionals for the board and the board professionals for the applicant join in the conclusion that this is a very low traffic generator and that this is an appropriate site for this particular use. Not going into all of the detail that all the witnesses placed before you, knowing that you paid attention as it was placed before you. I'd ask that you join in our request that the board grant the D1 variance, allow the proposed use as it has been presented with the conditions that we have we agreed to, and with the requirement that we return to this board with a site plan and address all of the issues that your professionals and the public have placed before us. Thank you.
My fellow board members, what's the pleasure of the board?
Well, Mr. Chair, I'd like to get just a couple of quick thoughts out. I think this was brought up, and I think we might want to consider this whole, I know this is not our thing, but the signage thing on the streets. The only thing I'm worried about is if you restrict the size of a truck going into that street and someone's going to get a furniture delivery. So my point there is let's try to think about that a little bit. I don't know really if that's something that they want to do, but anyway, I know this is just a use variance. We're not doing final site plan approval, but just a couple of things just to pull out for reminders. I love the fencing at the entrance for that for the neighboring property. So that'd be great. You know, if we can get that on record that they're going to work on that. Also, the sidewalk. I know that that's something we always bring up, but I think Jen's on a wonderful path there to get the entirety of Route 9 with sidewalks, and with all these projects, we're going to make that happen. The basin fencing and technically the residential buffers from across Route 9 and from across the street. I mean, I understand that, and I have no problem with that. So with all that stuff being said, I would like to make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Orozco. Eileen, roll call, please.
Well, Mr. Chairman, before the roll call, just so this requires 5 votes to pass, just so everyone's aware. If 4-3 doesn't do it, just so everyone knows.
Mr. Cantor.
Mr. Chairman, the one point I'd like to make is to the neighbors, and hopefully they're still listening. This is an HD1 zone, as everybody has pointed out. It's our job as a board to make sure that this building is as appropriate as possible and fits in with the neighborhood, and the Route 9 corridor fits in well. So that's what we as a board do, is make sure that it's not an ugly building, that it's right and it has the correct traffic. And I believe that the board, the applicant's professionals have definitely shown us that they've done way more than their due diligence in ensuring that this is an appropriate use of the land. I vote yes.
Mr. Hughes.
I'd like to echo what Mr. Cantor just said. Yeah, I agree with that too. I mean, it is Route 9. It is a commercial use, and I say yes.
Mr. Mertens.
I'm going to agree with our planning testimony. Our planner made a very good point to the residents. What you could have here is going to be far more intensive use than what is being proposed. Because, you know, you're buying property near a highway, unfortunately, you're going to expect these applications to come back. I would love to see this place maybe in a vacant land, but this is not my call. It's the applicant's choice to be applying for this. So I am going to vote yes as well for the use variance.
Mr. Roscoe,
Yes.
Mr. Stanton,
Want to tell the residents I empathize with them, and I do understand where they're coming from. If it was my backyard, I have to consider the fact that that could be a 24-hour fast food restaurant or somewhere that causes people to sit in a parking lot with much more traffic. In light of those thoughts, I'm going to vote yes.
Mr. Gonzalez,
Vote yes, simply because I think it's an honor to have developers come in and take dilapidated and abandoned properties and turn them into something that can be successful for our town. So yes, thank you.
and Chairman Saya.
Yes, of course, I'm going to say yes, with my fellow board members who adequately assessed the whole application. The point I want to make here is that, you know, when the movie theater went in, when the Lowe's went in, you know, the residents down there, you know, felt it, right? Behind the Lowe's, the one resident, all of a sudden, his residential property was zoned commercial, became part of the commercial landscape, and he had a drain basin in his backyard. And then, of course, we know that the movie theater, the berm, created some issues. Didn't do what it was supposed to do. So, you know, this is a low intensity use. Mr. Pape, you did a nice job putting it in front of us. Mr. Pape, I would only ask that you please do all the due diligence and ensure that, you know, the site plan considers all the residents in the area.
Mr. Chairman, we accept that responsibility, as does the applicant. And to Mr. Chair and to the board members, board professionals and public, to all, thank you and good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night, Mr. Pape.
Have a good.
Thank you for your confidence.
Good night, everybody.
Eileen?
Application is approved.
Thank you. So Eileen, when is the next meeting?
June 13th.
June 13th. Oh my goodness. All right. And you know, I want everyone to know that I heard that Mr. Nansen is back home and recovering. So
awesome.
Good. We pray for him, and we hope that, you know, he'll heal well. So
wonderful.
Good.
Prayers are with him. Yes.
The meeting is going to be in the township or Zoom?
We're zooming.
Okay.
Okay. So, Mr. Bear, thank you for your counsel tonight. Miss Eileen, nice job. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Mr. Chairman.
And Jen, Sherry, Charlie, thank you. To my fellow board members, I'm asking for someone to make a motion to vacate.
Motion to vacate, sir.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Good night, guys.
Have a wonderful Memorial Day, everyone. Wonderful Memorial Day.
Remember the
Take care.
veterans. Good night.